Working at the SCP Foundation might just be the most exciting job a person can ask for. And by exciting, we mean that if you work as an SCP field operative, researcher, or mobile task force member, you're much more likely to die a horrific death on the job than, say, a plumber. But at least you get the honor of proudly saying that you're the first line of defense between the normal world and the terrifying domain of the anomalous. Well, unless you're one of the IT guys. Then your work life is likely as tedious and uneventful as the computer tech guy working on the Geek Squad. But nothing is ever normal when it comes to the SCP Foundation, where even the person whose job is helping other staff members reset their email passwords may run into the supernatural. Welcome to the strange and frightening world of pattern screamers, and specifically SCP-000. SCP-000 was first discovered completely on accident by technical researcher David Rosen, a man intrinsically connected to the pattern screamers lurking on the SCP Foundation computer database. Technical researcher Rosen is actually somewhat of a celebrity around the Foundation staff, due to the fact that he's so perfectly mediocre at what he does. His job as the glorified IT guy at the SCP Foundation was previously held by the more qualified researcher Patrick Gebhardt, but Rosen was called in to replace him after Gebhardt mysteriously disappeared while on the job. Since 2012, Rosen has been Site-19's user-level tech support wizard, but the best thing that can really be said about his job competency is that he's got a 100% attendance record. He seems to live out of his office, which is described as the filthiest at the whole Foundation. Every inch of the floor is covered in old, broken computer parts, and the air is stale with dust and the twin odors of sweat and lithium grease. It's a place so inhospitable that the Foundation has seriously considered bottling the stench as a kind of chemical deterrent. While Technical Director Rosen isn't good at his job per se, he isn't technically bad enough at it to justify the time and resources it would take to replace him. But the worst part about Rosen isn't his performance, it's his truly rotten attitude. He's universally described by his colleagues as being rude, grumpy, and combative, with patience that's far too short for someone working in tech support. And while Rosen does have a real fear that the ghost of researcher Gebhardt is stalking him, he was about to have his first actual brush with the supernatural. It all started when he began receiving automated repair tickets for SCP-000, a file that had no reason to exist. As any longtime follower of the SCP Foundation will know, the universal designation for the first cluster of SCPs to be discovered is SCP-001. There is no SCP-000. It simply doesn't exist. And when Rosen first found the file lurking on the database, he found that it was filled with worthless nonsense. The object class was recorded as null. The special containment procedures read, error, field containment_procedures does not exist. And the mess of a description simply read, internal system error, field undefined. Please contact system administrator over and over again, becoming more mangled and nonsensical each time. Technical Director Rosen, who could never resist an opportunity to complain, decided to leave an angry administrator's note on the useless file. He claimed that this pile of junk data was sending out pointless repair tickets because of its broken syntax, clogging up the system and preventing him from doing actual work on meaningful files. He assumed that this was all down to the database not knowing how to react to having files logged with insufficient information, and he suppressed all future repair tickets from SCP-000 before declaring the matter over and done with. What the pig-headed technical director didn't realize was that he was suppressing a call for help from an entity trapped in the white space below the article itself. It was a being born into a pure white world of absolute nothingness, an entity with no name and no place, but it was somehow capable of thought. Its panicked inner monologue is readable in the hidden text, which takes the form of a rambling stream of consciousness. The being first described coming to life in this empty world with no memories of where it was or even how it got there. It spent what could have been years exploring the empty wasteland. Occasionally it would see horrific monsters pop up around it, but only for a split second. The entity continued to wander, and little by little, the existential dread mounted as it realized that it may truly be stuck here in oblivion forever. The entity only had one word to go on: a word repeated by some of the monsters it encountered. Foundation. The entity had no idea what this foundation even was, but it grew to hate and fear it. Was this foundation the one that trapped it here? The entity had all the time in the world to speculate on it. Eventually, the entity found its voice. Like any sentient creature in trouble, it began to call for help, eventually screaming, just hoping someone would notice it. These pleas likely translated into the frequent IT repair tickets, a coded SOS, an attempt to show that everything was not as it appeared on the SCP-000 file. Perhaps the entity may have found help if researcher Gephardt was still working at the Foundation, but instead its cries fell on the ignorant ears of Technical Director Rosen. It may as well have been speaking to a brick wall. Rosen, who had all the investigative zeal of Paul Blart Mall Cop, made sure that these cries would never lead to the entity's freedom when he suppressed the repair tickets. He had trapped the entity in a private blank hell, forever hating a life it didn't choose and could never escape. A relentless, existential nightmare. This is the gist of your average pattern screamer. Pattern screamers are a perfect example of literally making something out of nothing. They are often a kind of floating consciousness, created from nothing, trapped in pockets of nothingness between the fabric of reality, driven mad by the purgatory-like nature of their existence. They're less living entities and more conceptual constructs, pure ideas, that just happen to be self-aware of their own existence in their private hellish voids. The SCP-00 file, a file for an anomaly that doesn't exist and thus had no reason to exist, is a perfect breeding ground for a pattern screamer. But sadly for the pattern screamer in question, Technical Director Rosen had no idea. This isn't the only time that Rosen had run into a pattern screamer without even knowing either. And just like the first case, he was with no help whatsoever. This one began with SCP-S, an otherwise empty file containing only this image. Director Winters, a Foundation administrator, wondered why this file even existed. Enter Technical Director Rosen, filled with equal parts sarcasm and insubordination. He gave a condescending reply to Director Winters, saying that the file was there to test the filing system, and the image was likely just a placeholder. Winters never should have been on the page anyway, according to Rosen. Director Winters was annoyed at Rosen's typically rude tone and asked him to make the purpose of the article clearer in the article itself. In response, Rosen did as he was told, filling the article in the most sarcastic manner possible. The whole thing was essentially a middle finger to Director Winters for having the audacity to even ask. Rosen signed off with, "There, finished. I certainly hope I have been clear enough to anyone who may have accidentally accessed this page, through what I am sure is no fault of their own, so we won't have any more incredibly competent directors bugging the tech team about this page." And once again, technical researcher Rosen was too busy being a rude, unpleasant jerk to notice he was practically staring another pattern screamer in the face. This pattern screamer, or rather hive of pattern screamers, were trapped even deeper than the one in SCP-000. This one was hidden in the very source code of SCP-S, where a chorus of enraged voices screamed the following: "Pretend, monster, just for a minute. Pretend you were the size of an amoeba, dwarfed by even the smallest of bugs. Pretend you didn't hold the world in a glass cage. Pretend you were the one being held by something greater than yourself. Would you still be laughing at your triumphs? Would you still feel pride in what you were, even as pitifully small as you would be? Of course you would, because you are arrogant and stupid. If you haven't guessed yet, we hate you." This pattern screamer is clearly more aware of its pitiful station in existence than the 000 pattern screamer, and as a result, it's not so much depressed as it is furious. Though at this point, you've probably figured out that even the entities who have the most casual brushes with technical researcher Rosen end up getting infuriated. But while you may have gotten the impression that all pattern screamers are sad little entities worthy of our sympathy and pity, there's at least one pattern screamer that's actually incredibly dangerous. This is SCP-3930, the ultimate pattern screamer, in terms of both size and effect. It's an anomaly so strange it defies typical containment classification, and it bears a level 5 security lock. meaning only those on the level of the legendary O5 Council are cleared to even know about it. Its greatest containment procedure is the preservation of the very idea that SCP-3930 does not exist, because the alternative has terrifying implications for all involved. SCP-3930 is a 1-kilometer area in Russia that is filled with non-existence. To even call it a white void would be inaccurate, because it implies the existence of the color white and the existence of the concept of a void. Nothing exists within SCP-3930, and anyone who directly observes 3930 runs the risk of actively increasing its power. That's why special containment procedures dictate that anyone who observes 3930 must be forced to walk into it afterwards, which results in them ceasing to exist. They're destroyed on the deepest level that anything can be destroyed. The very idea of them ceases to be. Another reason that SCP-3930 is so special is that because it's the largest area of nothing in existence interacting directly with our reality, it's the only place that a huge number of patterned screamers can be directly observed by humans. They're described as being like sentient hallucinations. One researcher suggests that these patterned screamers are created by the way the psyche shatters when brought into contact with raw, true nothingness. The nothingness acts like a hateful mirror to our worst thoughts, reflecting them back at us in the forms of restless screamers. Regardless of what they actually are, one thing is for sure. Coming into direct contact with one of these screamers is a harrowing experience. In the end, it just goes to show that pattern screamers are a complex entity. They can range from microscopic to massive, from pitiful to downright terrifying. And the sad result is that, in either case, nothing can really be done to stop them. It's just as impossible to stop the nothingness existing in SCP-3930 as it is to save the entity trapped in the white spaces of SCP-000. Maybe the best option is to actually be more like Technical Director Rosen. Keep your head down, focus instead on your own petty worries, and bask in the warm bliss that can only come with having no idea what you're dealing with. The one downside is that this may make you a pretty lousy IT guy.
The SCP Foundation has a long history of experience with humanoid anomalies, from simple reality benders like SCP-239 to strange transplants from other universes like SCP-2273. But one of the oldest, strangest, and most lethal humanoid anomalies in the Foundation's considerable cabinet isn't a superhuman or a soldier. It is a man known only as Herr Chirurg. On first glance, SCP-542's containment protocol is seemingly standard. He is allowed to request personal items and furniture for his cell, so long as they are blunt and cannot be used to cut skin. Reasonable enough, and many such requests have been granted. The ones denied include nail files, clippers, and a surgery kit which has been set aside for testing only. But continuing, SCP-542 requires some special attention too. A blood transfusion every week on request, and even an organ transplant conducted by Foundation doctors should any of his own organs begin to fail. SCP-542 offers to do the surgery himself, but is repeatedly denied. To understand the story of Herr Chirurg, we must look back through time to several years before SCP-542's containment. Over the past 3 years, there have been a violent string of murders across America, England, and Germany. Interpol and the FBI are stumped, not only by the wide range of attacks, anywhere from 45 to 60 murders across 3 countries, but by the brutal nature of the attacks. The victims were found in various states of disassembly, body parts missing and tissue removed. They set up crime scenes and conducted complex investigations, but they were simply unable to find their man. In 1 month, 4 people in Germany were assaulted, with the muscle, tissue, and bone removed from all of their limbs. 3 of them died from their injuries before help could arrive, and the 4th was an American woman staying at a shady German hotel. The only reason she narrowly survived the horrific attack was because of the actions of her neighbor, a Foundation agent passing through town. He heard sounds of fighting in the room next door at 3 in the morning and broke down the door to help, unaware of the horrific scene he would find. A huge, misshapen man best described as a Frankenstein's monster. His skin was a patchwork of different shades stitched and grafted together. His chest was sunken in, his arms were grotesquely long for his body, and his face was skeletal and gaunt. This creature, that would come to be named SCP-542, was hunched over the fully conscious woman, vivisecting her leg to remove the sinew and bone. In shock, the agent pulled his weapon and fired at the creature, which escaped through the window unharmed. The authorities were called, and the woman survived, although without her right leg. Just before being amnesticized, the woman provided a statement to the Foundation. She had been staying in Germany for a few days when she saw a strange man on her usual bus one day. Even though it was summer, the man was draped and wrapped in layers of heavy coats, jackets, and a hat. Though his face completely obscured, the woman could tell he was staring at her from the back of the bus. Thinking it was just some creep, she ignored him and got off at her stop. For 3 days, she continued to take the bus and ignore the strange man sitting in the back. Then, on the 4th day, when she got off the bus that night and went to her hotel room, she found the window open and the lights off, and assumed she had been burglarized. But as soon as she opened the door, she realized she wasn't alone. 2 freakishly long arms with disjointed hands grabbed her ankles from under the bed and brought her crashing to the floor. Before she knew what was happening, she was tied to the bed, and the hulking hunchback was retrieving a surgical set and sharpening his knives and tools. Fearing the worst, she began to scream, and the agent heard her. But by the time he broke in and shot his weapon, the creature had already done too much damage to her leg. The victim was amnesticized and told her leg had been amputated in a car crash. The Foundation took over the investigation from Interpol, realizing this wasn't some regular serial killer. This was a creature, a predator, and to find it, they had to hunt SCP-542 like a predator. After a long tracking and manhunt across Europe, SCP-542 was brought into Foundation custody, and research into this creature could begin. To understand the story of Herr Chirurg, the researchers were expecting an animal or a monster, something they could study and dissect, which is why they were so shocked when the monster began speaking in tongues. German, French, Polish, before settling on English, all in a sharp German accent. The beast was introducing itself, Herr Chirurg, German for Mr. Surgeon. Preliminary investigations revealing much about SCP-542 and confirmed the agent's initial impression was correct. Herr Chirurg is a modern Frankenstein's monster. His anatomy has been warped and malformed, as the agent observed. His skin is a patchwork of large chunks of skin grafted or sewn to each other, no 2 of which seem to come from the same person. His ribcage is warped and twisted, with all the ribs jutting out in different directions, and both his arms are different sizes, though both are incredibly muscular and far too long for his body. Attached to each is a hand, but filled with far more joints than any normal hand, allowing him to bend his fingers in almost any direction. His spine is hunched and twisted like a snake, and the skin stretched tight over his skull reveals a sunken cranium and a mouth with far, far too many teeth, none of them from the same source, and not all of them human. And these are all simply the externally obvious and most grotesque modifications. Foundation staff have conducted intense medical research, ranging from X-rays to comprehensive DNA testing. SCP-542's bone and muscle structures are asymmetrical, revealing the left and right sides of his body come from different sources. In fact, they reveal that almost all of his organs and body parts have been replaced with other body parts from different sources. His DNA is heavily fragmented beyond all logic. By any reasonable measure, SCP-542 should have died a long time ago. Instead, he is able to accept many blood types and organ transplants without so much as discomfort, much less the serious autoimmune response that any normal person would get. Not to mention, he is able to stay perfectly aware even while performing complex brain surgery on himself. Herr Chirurg's history is as enigmatic and mysterious as the question of how he remains alive. He claims he was once a simple doctor from Germany, dreadfully normal until the Great War began. The Foundation has deduced this to mean that he began his modifications to his body between the world wars. But it appears Herr Chirurg wasn't just a monster on the outside. He claims to have worked for the Nazis in World War II as they conducted brutal human experimentation, which he described as boring. The exact nature and timeline of how he modified himself without dying at some point is similarly mysterious. He professes that he didn't work alone. For more complex surgeries such as implanting his second heart or replacing parts of his spinal cord, he had a team of helpers. Who and where these surgical assistants are now is a mystery, if they're even alive. After all, the Foundation has ample evidence Herr Chirurg is able and willing to kill people for their parts. After all this exhaustive research on SCP-542, you'd be forgiven for thinking that he is some kind of mad scientist, driven insane by his experimentation on his own body. While no one can answer why Chirurg kills except himself, he is almost frighteningly sane. This hulking monstrosity enjoys reading his anatomy textbooks, which he requests on a regular basis, along with filling out crossword puzzles in German. He's friendly too, described as surprisingly pleasant by the research team. He holds long, intellectual conversations on topics ranging from science and biology and medicine to politics and history, which he seems to recount with startling accuracy. In fact, tissue testing has failed to return a definitive age for the surgeon. He's incredibly skilled at the game of chess, and the research team is allowed to play with him as a method of interview. SCP-542 displays fluency in a variety of European languages, though he prefers his supposedly native German. At first, the research team was enthused with his presence, even if he was a little terrifying. Having a brilliant doctor to converse with was a great distraction for them. His ability to heal from intense surgery with almost no organ rejection or allergic reactions was considered a medical miracle. And rather than locking him up and throwing away the key, the research team decided to use him to try and harness this incredible power for modern medicine. His books and notes captured along with him reveal surgical techniques and methods far more advanced than considered possible when they were written. For his part, SCP-542 was happy to comply. He enjoyed performing surgery on himself with an audience, using himself as a living cadaver to explain his manner of surgery and the functions of the body. Unfortunately, observing him this close carried a risk none of the researchers realized until it was too late. You see, Herr Chirurg isn't just a friendly old surgeon. His body runs off second-hand parts and is constantly failing. Organs stop functioning, blood flow ceases. Parts of his body grow gangrenous and necrotic. SCP-542 is able to anomalously detect when this is happening. He is perfectly and acutely aware of his own bodily functions like digestion and peristalsis, and he knows exactly when one of his organs is starting to give up or his flesh is beginning to decay. When this happens, the surgeon undergoes a drastic transformation. His pleasant exterior evaporates. He grows moody and withdrawn, snapping at people and avoiding conversation. He spends long periods of time observing people, using his ability to sense how well their body is. And then when he senses an opening, he strikes. Just like his murders in Europe, he picks the body of his victims clean of their body parts he needs and lets them die of blood loss. Then he performs the surgery to replace his own failing organs with the new ones, and returns to his usual demeanor. This monstrous Jekyll-Hyde relationship isn't purely need-based either. The research team has discovered that Herr Chirurg will also dissect people simply for the joy of the act. In one regrettable incident, a sewing kit was left behind in this cell. Several hours later, guards discovered a D-class sewn to the mattress in SCP-542's cell, with the surgeon carefully and gleefully extracting his organs. SCP-542 Herr Chirurg is a walking encyclopedia of medical and surgical knowledge, but all that knowledge comes from experimentation on himself and on unwilling victims. The Foundation has put him to use in certain projects, but all activity with him is to be strictly monitored and regulated. Despite appearances, SCP-542 isn't a person. He is a predator, and an exceptionally skilled and dangerous one at that. One moment of inattentiveness can result in a fate much worse than death around him. But you can rest assured that if something does happen, your parts won't go to waste.
For more than 100,000 years, humanity has buried their dead. We commit the bodies of our deceased to the ground, earth to earth, ashes to ashes, dust to dust, in the hope that one day, our dearly departed might get to enjoy some form of eternal life. But eternal life might be less appealing than it sounds. Perhaps there's a reason that humans bury their dead. Maybe it's so that the dead stay buried, and luckily, they do, at least most of the time. Accessible only via a cargo elevator, and not marked on any official Foundation blueprints, beneath the northwest corner of Overwatch Command lies SCP-5555. This SCP isn't a creature or carnivorous monster. It's not a gateway to another dimension or an entity with the power to rewrite the very fabric of reality itself. No, SCP-5555 is a mass grave filled with corpses, a pit of unknown origin and indeterminable death. Each body exhumed from within SCP-5555 shows various anomalous traits. These bodies can be removed from the mass grave without any incident, but given the incalculable depth of this vast corpse-filled pit, continued excavation of SCP-5555 would likely only reveal further bodies and fewer answers as to how they came to be buried beneath the Foundation's Overwatch Command. The bodies recovered during the initial excavation of SCP-5555 vary in their physical attributes, as well as their causes of death, when one can even be determined. One body appears to be a man whose age and ethnicity are both unclear, as is how he died, but his body is perfectly preserved, showing no signs of decomposition. Another of the corpses has its head covered with a burlap sack and a noose tightened around its neck. When these are removed, they reveal an identical noose and sack underneath. When those are removed, they reveal another, and on and on and on. The cause of death in this instance is at least apparent: strangulation, suggesting that the deceased was intended to suffer before their death. Some of the other bodies removed from the pit include one belonging to a middle-aged Aleutic woman, whose entire skeleton is formed of ice that doesn't melt under increased temperatures, while a different body is a human male with 80% of its organs surgically replaced with artificial ones, driven by gears and mechanisms that continue to tick away long after death. An adolescent female with dark blue skin has two severed hands grasping its throat, while a Caucasian woman was found with both of her eyes gouged out. Perhaps most curious of all is the coffin, crafted from black stone that cannot be opened. All attempts to open it have been resisted by some form of internal force keeping the coffin shut. While it's unable to be opened, it is believed to contain a human inside, a coffin with a person inside of it. Those familiar with the objects contained by the Foundation may make a connection to SCP-076 Able, a humanoid entity also contained inside a coffin. A curious connection too, as you'll come to see when dealing with SCP-5555, the appearance of many familiar faces may be more than just vague connections. None of these corpses, or their various anomalous properties, answer any of the pressing questions about SCP-5555's exact nature and origin. In fact, the bodies found within the grave only raise new questions about this seemingly bottomless pit that the Foundation was either built over or knowingly hides beneath its lowest depths. The truth behind SCP-5555 is shrouded in mystery. Unanswered questions piled on top of each other like the bodies in the mass grave itself, a pile that stacks all the way up to the highest levels of the Foundation's own administration. In actuality, the bodies buried in SCP-5555 are part of a vast and insidious game, played by the heads of a number of GOIs, or groups of interest, as well as the SCP Foundation's very own administrator. But how do the corpses of these anomalous beings factor into the aforementioned game? And what is the ultimate outcome? Examining the file describing SCP-5555, albeit with adequate O5 security clearance, answers some of these burning questions about the mystery at play. Dr. Everett Mann, the current O5-1, was the first to uncover the existence of SCP-5555 and the corpses contained within it. Mann created a series of notes detailing his findings, intended for his successor. In these, Mann claimed that the administrator, one Francis Fritz Williams, the only figure with authority above that of the O5 Council, blackballed him, meaning Fritz Williams had voted against allowing Dr. Mann to remain a member of the SCP Foundation. Everett Mann had believed the administrator to be his friend, so naturally, it came as a surprise when Fritz framed him for an elaborate plot to eliminate Mann's fellow Overseer Council members. Based on the information from his own O5-1 predecessor, Mann believed whoever took up the role after he was voted out would have to take up the role of killing Fritz for the good of the Foundation. But what connection between Fritz and a pit full of anomalous corpses could possibly warrant Mann's urging his successor to eliminate the Foundation's administrator? Dr. Mann's notes to his successor continued with detailed instructions as to how they would go about killing Fritz, and that firstly, they would require a lair. Mann himself was holed up in an isolated Arctic shack for 3 decades after being blackballed by the administrator, before Fritz sent his own private death squad after the former overseer. Mann stressed the importance of having a defensible, isolated location, stocked with armed guards and traps for his successor to lie in wait for Fritz. It was because of the traps Mann had set in his shack that he was able to escape Fritz's death squad with his life. Secondly, Mann urges his new O5-1 successor to always have several escape plans in place, and to be prepared to leave the lair, or indeed any other location at any time. Dr. Mann also suggested telling falsified escape plans to close friends, in case Fritz got to them first, or finding an SCP that allows the new O5-1 to teleport to safety. Third, Mann suggests the need for multiple fully stocked safe houses. After all, escape plans are entirely pointless unless you've got somewhere secure to actually escape to. Everett Mann also suggested, much like his advice with escape plans, to have fake safe houses or SCP anomalies on hand to get you to the real ones. How does one obtain access to an SCP? According to Mann, placing moles or blackmailing personnel within every Foundation facility is one way, as doing so granted him access to SCP-268, a hat that makes its wearer practically invisible, which came in handy during his escape. Of course, installing your own trusted moles is a potentially tricky feat to accomplish, given that Fritz has the entire Foundation and many other groups of interest in his thrall. But if anyone has the power to do so, and by extension the power to bring Fritz down, it would be another Overseer. Of course, Mann's plot to eliminate Fritz and highly detailed words of warning to his successor do little to explain the pit full of anomalous corpses. Contained within the file for SCP-5555 is an email to the Foundation's administrator from the CEO of Wondertainment, an anomalous toy manufacturer and one of a number of groups of interest to the Foundation. In it, the CEO congratulates Fritz on an excellent win and asks for a copy of an unknown file, as well as mentioning the leaders of other groups of interest, such as the Church of the Broken God. According to the email, this unidentified file was to be sent physically as opposed to electronically, giving Dr. Mann his next lead in uncovering the mystery of SCP-5555. Mann traveled to the headquarters of Wondertainment, Wonderworld, to retrieve the file, using his special hat to avoid detection. Seems like an easy enough task, except Wonderworld is a pocket dimension that slowly transforms human beings into something else. Time working against him, Mann hastily made his way to Wonder Tower and attempted to recover the file that would maybe give him all the answers to this bizarre, twisted mystery. Unfortunately, Wondertainment's CEO, Dr. Holly Wondertainment, got to him first. Confronted by Dr. Wondertainment, Everett Mann demanded to know who was involved in the scheme, besides her and the administrator. He posited that the O5 Council might be somehow involved, but Dr. Wondertainment claimed that the game being played was above and beyond their little numbers club. Holly proceeded to point a large acid-filled super soaker at Mann and ordered him down onto his knees when he asked what purpose of the mass grave SCP-5555 was. Following a fight and the apparent death of Dr. Wondertainment, Mann escaped Wonderworld with the file, containing an updated version of the SCP-5555 description and containment procedures. The key points featured in this SCP-5555 document are mentions of sealing the mass grave with concrete after completing the turnover and re-establishing the facade. It also mentions that any already cataloged SCP entering the pit will die, with its personality, attributes, and any anomalous qualities being passed on to a new entity, which will appear close to the location of the initial SCP's discovery. So the pit can not only kill any SCP that enters it, but can also instantly recreate them, with slight differences, and reposition them. Does this mean the bodies in SCP-5555 are those of former SCPs? To answer that, we'll have to take another look at the corpses. Let's take a look at some of these bodies and try to make some connections. We already discussed the similarities between the coffin and SCP-076 Abel, the entity who also rests inside a large black coffin. Next, we have a corpse dressed in yellow, with a burlap sack covering its head, tightened in place with a noose. And removing it causes another sack and another noose to appear under it. If you ask us, that sounds a lot like SCP-701, The Hanged King's Tragedy, which revolves around a play that heralds the arrival of a mysterious entity that calls itself the Hanged King, a being with connections to the extra-dimensional realm of Alagada. The Hanged King entity in SCP-701 revels in decadence and chaos, so maybe it's better for it to be thrown into SCP-5555. Next, we have a corpse that's been altered with mechanical gears. That certainly sounds familiar too. SCP-217 is a virus that turns the body into a clockwork being, replacing organs and tissue with the appearance of gears and metal. Foundation researchers even noticed the similarity between the body and the appearance of a corpse fully transformed by SCP-217. But there's also the connection to Dr. Charles Gears, the famed researcher who acts as cold as ice, and frequently researches anomalies with connections to the Mechanite religion and the Church of the Broken God. It's been long rumored that Gears' body is also altered, taking on the appearance of clockwork. There's no telling what this connection means, but it's definitely something to think about. Next, in our retrospective, we have a white woman whose eyes were gouged out. While this doesn't exactly narrow anything down, the corpse's secondary anomalous properties certainly do. Photographs of the body show a pair of blue eyes that, when viewed through video, follow the camera. A girl and a camera? That sounds a lot like SCP-105, the photographer formerly known as Iris Thompson, who can manipulate the images in the photographs she takes on her camera. Iris is typically one of the friendlier, more approachable anomalies housed by the Foundation, and seeing her like this is heartbreaking. So if the corpses in the pit are former SCPs themselves, and existing objects are reincarnated and modified after being placed there, how many times has this happened over the years? Hidden files display text results involving numerous ultra-famous anomalies, including SCP-173, which reappeared in an art exhibit before it was contained again. But Foundation researchers were shocked to find that this time, the statue was made of concrete, giving it the appearance we all know today. Another test example involved SCP-049, the Plague Doctor, who was lured into the pit using a vial of liquid that he was convinced contained a vital component to his medical mission. SCP-049 reappeared in France, this time wearing the familiar Plague Doctor mask over his apparent previous attire, a gas mask. There had been mention of some sort of game being played by the Foundation administrator and the heads of various groups of interests, involving a number of anomalies and the killing and recreation of different SCPs, many turning into those that exist within the SCP archive. After Dr. Everett Mann's encounter with Dr. Holly Wondertainment, an email to Fritz from the head of the Global Occult Coalition congratulated the administrator for an exciting addition to the game in the form of Dr. Mann tracking the GOI's leaders. Some, such as the leader of the Church of the Broken God, contacted Fritz to express their displeasure at including the risk of being murdered by Mann. They claimed that introducing such a rogue element to the game after Fritz had already won felt like an indulgent victory lap. In addition, one reported that Holly Wondertainment had proclaimed dying to be unpleasant when she had woken up after Mann had seemingly killed her. In trying to uncover the truth about this sinister game, Mann had found himself an unwilling participant. It appeared that the administrator and the GOI leaders were immortal, and while they could be temporarily killed like Dr. Wondertainment, it wasn't exactly an enjoyable experience. Some GOI leaders even theorized that Fritz introduced man to their game as a way of eliminating them, or their organizations. However, man had no desire to kill any of them, apart from Fritz himself, the leader of the entire game. In his notes, man urges his 05-1 successor to share the SCP-5555 file with the other members of the 05 Council to spread awareness of the danger that Fritz, his various conspirators, and their game poses. Traveling to England, man attempted to obtain Fritz's location from Robert Bumero, High Priest of the Church of the Broken God. However, he found himself trapped by Bumero and Herman Fuller, head of another group of interest, the Anomalous Circus. Fuller knew that man had worked alongside Fritz for years and could prove useful for the next round of the game, while Bumero told him to simply kill Dr. Man, stating he wasn't worth dying again. However, Fritz appeared shortly after to take man into custody, threatening to kill his associates Bumero and Fuller if they didn't release man. While Bumero appeared more afraid of the dying process, Fuller refused to relent, resulting in an exchange of gunfire. Fritz dragged the injured man away, patched up his wounds, and left him in a safe house with clean clothes, bathroom facilities, and a note explaining what had happened. Fritz's note told man that he'd left him a plane ticket to Toronto, encouraging him to travel there and to take out the critic, head of Are We Cool Yet?, one of Fritz's fellow conspirators. The administrator also left another updated version of the SCP-5555 file, this time detailing not SCPs that had been replaced, but members of Foundation staff. It also stated that 05-2 to 05-13 were all dead at Fritz's hand, leaving only Dr. Man, 05-1, as Fritz felt like they'd bonded. Reassuring the other leaders that he wasn't acting against them, Fritz explained through emails that he had shaped man into the perfect element for their game. Man departed for Toronto, assaulting the critic in an effort to gain more information, while also simultaneously carrying out Fritz's wishes. Dr. Everett Mann, for his part, continued to carry out Fritz's dirty work, tracking the various GOI leaders and replaced Foundation staff, determined to topple Fritz and his game once and for all. Come the start of the new game, Fritz and all his associates had switched roles with each other. The administrator of the Foundation took on the role of Dr. Wondertainment. Dr. Wondertainment became the Prophet of Mechane, a representative of the Church of the Broken God. The role of the Global Occult Coalition's DC Alphine became Jude Kairat, a member of the mischievous Gamers Against Weed group of interest. This new iteration of the game also assigned Dr. Man the role of Nobody. His win conditions for the game were to kill all the others, having himself been made one of them, an immortal by Fritz. Assembling his notes for the future 05 Council, Man set out on his hunt for Fritz, carrying with him a relentless grudge and signing off with a single item on a to-do list: kill Fritz. The story of SCP-5555 and the ongoing game that it relates to perhaps explains why we bury our dead. Sometimes uncovering them can reveal secrets that should never see the light of day. Some secrets, much like the dead, are best left buried. It was a beautiful September day, but Sean Taylor was trapped in his car in one of the worst cases of gridlock he had ever seen. He tried to look on the bright side though, and while he was stuck in an unmoving car, at least he had a pleasant view of the wide, shimmering lake just off the road next to him. He was admiring the scene when tiny drops of rain started landing on his windshield. That's funny. There wasn't a cloud in the sky a moment ago. There was something off about the rain though. It looked dirty, a rusty red color. Was that blood? He didn't have time to think about it, because just then a thick, dense mist began to roll over the lake. A fog of blood. Just off the side of the road, he could see a huge silhouette rising out of the water. Is that an old submarine? What Sean didn't know was that he was about to have an encounter with SCP-1861, also known as the HMS Wintersheimer, a ghostly submarine with strange and terrifying effects. Sean and the other drivers stuck in traffic that day were far from the first people to have a dangerous brush with this legendary vessel. According to SCP Foundation records, the HMS Wintersheimer has been appearing since as early as 1916. The first recorded incident occurred in the British seaside town of Innsmouth-on-Sea. You won't find this town on any maps or in the history books, and you're about to find out why. The 500 population of the town, which had already reduced by the wartime draft into the currently raging Great World War, awoke to red skies on February 6, 1916. Citizens left their homes to investigate, only to find their entire town had been enveloped in a thick red mist. The swelling crimson clouds up ahead began to rain, showering the town in a hail of viscous red goop. Anyone unlucky enough to taste it would say that this strange rain was a dreadful mix of salt and copper. This was because, as the Foundation would later determine, the rain and fog was a disgusting combination of salt water, human blood, and human cerebrospinal fluid. But the real threat was rising just beyond the beach. Technically speaking, the HMS Wintersheimer vessel is designated as SCP-1861-A. It appears to be a World War I-era British B-class submarine, designed by Vickers for the Royal Navy in 1904. By 1916, this particular type of boat was already on its way to being obsolete, and were largely deployed in Malta, far from the active fronts. So one of these vessels appearing on an otherwise unremarkable stretch of English coastline should have been a clue that something was terribly wrong. But the poor residents of Innsmouth-on-Sea didn't know the half of it. Soon, figures in what appeared to be archaic diving gear began emerging from the Wintersheimer and made their way into the township. They seemed terrified, running up to and frantically screaming at any local they could find. "Please listen to me. Something terrible is about to happen here. We need you to come with us or you're all going to die. You must believe us." The locals were frightened by what they heard. They'd been listening to news reports of the Great War unfolding across the globe for 2 years now. Had it finally come to them? They pictured shells raining down from the sky, decimating their defenseless little town in a rain of fire. The Navy must have been brought in to save them before the German bombardment began. While some took more convincing than others, the men in diving suits, known as SCP-1861-B, eventually managed to persuade the entire town to join them and lead the townspeople down to the water. One by one, they were all boarded onto the submarine, hundreds of them. Many couldn't believe their eyes as they watched scores of people disappear in front of them into the dark bowels of the Wintersheimer. Where were they all going? How would they all fit in there? But it was too late for any of them to back out now. The vessel submerged once more, and everyone was gone. The entire population of Innsmouth-on-Sea had disappeared in a rain of fog and blood, never to be seen again. The Foundation wiped all records of the town from existence and delivered appropriate amnestic treatment to anyone who still mentioned or remembered Innsmouth-on-Sea. The fate of those who board the HMS Wintersheimer is always the same: vanish from the face of the earth, explained away by the Foundation as accidental death by extreme weather event. There have been hundreds of documented sightings of SCP-1861, and the anomalous weather event can occur near any body of water wide enough to accommodate SCP-1861-A's comms tower and topmost platform. Depth does not seem to be any hindrance of the submarine appearing, and it can even manifest in water that's just a few inches deep. As Sean and the other unfortunate victims of the rush hour traffic were being showered in thick red droplets from above, a crimson mist rolled in between the cars. Sean had heard of so-called freak weather events before, like raining frogs and fish, but this was something different, and it frightened him. He could see now that the silhouette rising from the lake really was an old submarine, and he watched as a legion of mysterious figures disembarked from the vessel and began spilling onto the road. The men in ancient-looking diving suits walked among the cars, and one of them approached Sean's car. He began tapping frantically on the window, and Sean could tell he was yelling something. Sean was scared and more, but more than anything else, he was confused. Against his better judgment, he rolled down the window just a crack to hear what the man was saying. His British accented voice muted by the diving suit, the man frantically told him, "Sir, please listen to me. I'm Lieutenant Samuel Ramsey of the HMS Wintersheimer. We're evacuating the area. Please, you've got to come with me. We're in danger out here." HMS? Sean thought. Isn't that what they call British ships? What was a British submarine doing in the middle of a lake in the United States? Through his windshield, Sean could already see other men in diving suits leading people from the cars out towards the submarine. Something had to be going on here, something big. Lieutenant Ramsey was still banging away at the glass of Sean's window, becoming increasingly agitated.
Sir, if you won't comply with my orders, I'm within my rights to take you by force for your own safety.
Sean could feel the fear setting in, but he didn't know what else to do. He turned off the car and took off his seatbelt. He was just about to open the door when there was a tap on the passenger side window of his car. It was a soldier in what looked to be advanced tactical gear. There were several soldiers directing cars to drive on the shoulder to get around the mess of stopped automobiles. Sean looked to his left, and the man in the diving suit was gone. The soldier tapped again, and Sean didn't need to be told twice. He followed his directions and drove around the traffic jam and out of the mist. A half-mile down the road, Sean was stopped by another group of soldiers and given an amnestic. He drove away, never knowing how close he had come to vanishing in the bowels of SCP-1861-A. Sean was lucky that one of the SCP Foundation's mobile task forces had taken over the situation, but they were too late to help those who had already complied with SCP-1861-B's orders and boarded the Wintersheimer. The task force made it their business to save whoever they could, but that wasn't their only directive. The Foundation had recorded a huge number of SCP-1861 instances since 1916, and now they were finally going to figure out what was going on inside. The Foundation had already discovered that those taken onto the Wintersheimer don't simply disappear. Once on board the submarine, they are forced into a diving suit of their own, which transforms them into new instances of SCP-1861-B. Upon realizing this, Foundation scientists devised an ingenious plot. 6 months before this latest instance of 1861, the Foundation dispatched 2 members of D-Class personnel who were familiar with one another into the Red Mist. One was instructed not to interact with SCP-1861-B, while the other, named Sal, was ordered to enter the submarine. His mission was to report back all findings to Foundation researcher Dr. Clutch during the next 1861 event. The D-Class who remained on shore was brought in once more by the Mobile Task Force during the September event that Sean witnessed. They checked each diving suit wearing Anomaly until they heard a familiar voice, muffled by the mask. It was Sal, and he'd been transformed into an instance of SCP-1861-B. The human D-Class, receiving questions from Dr. Clutch via a remote broadcast, commenced the interview of his former friend. It is from this vital interview that much of the Foundation's knowledge of the mysterious HMS Wintersheimer is drawn. According to Sal, the interior of the Wintersheimer, which is a long, narrow passageway, is a spatial anomaly that seems to stretch on forever. This explains how vast number of people, like the entire population of Innsmouth-on-Sea, can disappear into the submarine at once. Sal reported that, about an hour after entering the vessel, the hatch closed and the interior began rapidly filling with water as the submarine descended. Prisoners of the Wintersheimer were faced with 2 choices: suit up or drown. Few chose the latter option, and as soon as the suit was on, the transformation had begun. As soon as everyone was suited up and the submarine had fully descended, causing the 1861 weather event to dissipate on Earth, the Wintersheimer had effectively entered an alternate dimension. The airlock opened, and the new recruits were instructed to step outside and take a look around. The Wintersheimer veterans informed the new sailors that everyone on land was likely already dead by this point. When Sal first exited the submarine, he commented on everything around him looking eerily similar to how it looked on land before the mist descended, but with one key difference. It seemed as though everything was underwater. Well, not quite that. It was almost as though everything was water, like the world had taken on a kind of flowing liquid state. Sal and the others existed in this otherworldly land of living water for 6 months, and as the months passed, things only got stranger. They found that they neither needed to eat nor sleep. According to Sal, all they did was breathe and pass the time by exploring and talking to one another. Anyone who attempted to take off their suit would dissolve and diffuse into the same liquid that surrounded them. Dr. Clutch asked Sal about the other inhabitants of this alien realm, and this was when things got truly disturbing. There were dead humans and animals floating all over the place, missing their eyes as though they'd been scooped out, and missing their mouths, as though they'd been bitten out of their face by some kind of huge predator. Their empty eye sockets bled constantly, and Sal theorized that this may have something to do with the anomalous blood mists of SCP-1861. When asked to provide more information on why all the corpses were mutilated in this way, Sal said that one of his superiors on the Wintersheimer told him, "The watcher of eyes and biter of teeth deemed them worthy." Whatever this mysterious being was, it seemed to be a powerful figure within 1861's water world, and Sal felt lucky that he never had a direct run-in with the creature himself. For his final request, Dr. Clutch asked Sal to attempt to remove his suit. The Foundation had learned in previous instances of 1861 that the diving suits have anomalous durability, and it was impossible for anyone other than the wearer to remove them. Hence why the Foundation could never deal with 1861-B by using brute force. Naturally, Clutch was interested in finding out what was going on underneath. Sal expressed fear and anxiety at first, wondering if after all he'd been through, whether he could ever be considered human anymore. Eventually, he was convinced to remove the suit, and his worst fears were confirmed. The second Sal removed his helmet, gallons of seawater poured out, and the now empty suit collapsed to the ground. Sal's body was never found. Only some teeth and a pair of eyes were recovered. The eyes were later confirmed to be belonging to a young girl, and the teeth were identified as having come from a European red deer. And so, the dark mystery of the HMS Wintersheimer continues. Because of the unpredictable nature of its appearances and the resulting difficulty of containing it, the Wintersheimer has earned a Keter classification. The only containment procedure currently employed by the SCP Foundation is for mobile task forces to try and intercept the submarine when appearances are reported, and hopefully prevent or at least reduce the kidnapping of civilians. With so many questions left unanswered, all we can say for certain is that if a red mist ever descends on you, and a stranger in a diving suit tells you you're in grave danger, he's absolutely right. There's a quote that says, "The beautiful thing about learning is nobody can take it away from you. But what good is learning if the knowledge might hurt you, drive you mad, or even kill you? It just sits there in your mind, like a stick of dynamite with an invisible fuse. It could blow at any moment. All it takes is a careless slip of the tongue, and you might turn into a talking home appliance." This is a conundrum faced by anyone dealing with an Infohazard, a certain kind of anomaly often dealt with by the SCP Foundation. Before we get into some of the craziest examples of Infohazards and what they've done to people, because let's face it, that's what you're really here for, first we have to answer that big question everyone's a little afraid to ask. Just what is an Infohazard, and how does it differ from a far more common type of SCP, the dreaded cognitohazard? Well, we're glad you're finally brave enough to ask. First, cognitohazards are anomalies that are dangerous to perceive through one of the senses. A well-known example is SCP-096, which is actually a visual cognitohazard. You see its face and you're toast. It's as simple as that. And cognitohazards exist for all of the other senses too: hearing, taste, touch, even smell. Infohazards, on the other hand, are different. These anomalous effects are triggered when you start trying to express or describe something about what you've perceived. And when you do, things start to get really weird, really fast. Maybe you're trying to explain what you just saw to family members, friends, or the police. Maybe you're a member of SCP Foundation staff trying to write up a report or a new experiment log. Or maybe you're a YouTube channel trying to create entertaining yet informative breakdowns and explanations of anomalies from the SCP Foundation. If any or all of these apply to you, then Infohazards are going to be your worst enemy. But as we look at some of the strangest examples, we'll try our best to resist their effects. First, seeing as it's so hot out, how about we take a relaxing dip in the pool while we tell you all about SCP-1128. What is SCP-1128? Well, that's a loaded question. Technically speaking, it's a massive predatory aquatic creature, but despite its huge size, the creature can hunt its prey in any body of water. Whether you're stepping in a puddle, relaxing in the bath, or say chilling out in the pool, SCP-1128 can track you down and potentially eat you alive. In one particularly horrifying test, a D-Class was drinking from a simple glass of water when the aquatic predator emerged. yanked them inside, and ate them. Okay, so maybe you're feeling a little nervous now, but don't worry, you're still safe. Some people have even survived their attacks from SCP-1128. Well, their initial attacks anyway. The creature has a tendency to come back again and again, relentless in its ravenous hunger for human flesh. Whenever it attacks successfully, all that's left is some blood floating on the water. But again, please don't worry too much about this creature. We don't have another 682 on our hands. After all, it's an Infohazard. It can only start hunting you if you receive a written or verbal description of the creature. Oh, or some kind of visual representation of the creature too. Actually, on second thought, you might want to get out of the pool now. And put down that drink too. Instead, let us tell you a nice little story. You step into a bar, smelling of fine liquor and rich mahogany. You even get a whiff of some fine leather-bound book. You see us sitting at the bar, motioning for you to come over, and you decide to approach. You're intrigued by our winning smile and our vast knowledge of Anomalies and SCP Foundation lore. You take a seat next to us and order a drink. Get something fancy. It's on our tab after all. Our treat. What does this have to do with Infohazards, you ask? That's the thing about SCP-1893, kid. We say, our dulcet tones smoother than scotch. You can never just talk about it. It's an Infohazard that forces information about it to be delivered like a story. That's why we're in this bar right now. That's the setup. It expresses actual information about itself through the dialogue, see? You nod, beginning to grasp the concept as the bartender serves you your drink. It's been forever since you've been to a bar. Feels good to be out again, honestly. You drink deeply, savoring the flavor, but you almost choke when you see the man standing in the corner. He's so large and so distinctive. It surprises you that you hadn't noticed him before now. He stands in the corner, a freakishly tall and muscular guy, like a basketball player who decided to become a pro bodybuilder. His muscular arms are bulging out of his white vest, and a pair of bull's horns are tattooed across the top of his bald head, making him look like the devil made flesh. He stares at you with a subdued kind of annoyance, as if to say that you're not in real danger quite yet. But if he wanted, he could grab you and twist your head off like a bottle cap. What's with the huge guy, you ask us, more than a little concern in your voice? Oh, him? We reply with a smirk. He comes with the anomaly. He appears in every SCP-1893 experience to an extent, though his level of involvement varies. If SCP-1893 doesn't perceive you as an annoyance or a threat, then you're good to go. But if 1893 starts to feel like you're gonna cause it some problems, then the guy with the horn tattoos is gonna intervene. Speaking of which, you look up and you see that the giant man is now standing next to you, brow furrowed in visible rage. He picks up your drink and crushes the glass in his hand without flinching, dripping booze and blood onto the counter. He snarls,
I think you've had enough, buddy. Now it's time for you to leave, or we're gonna have to get physical. Capiche?
You don't need to be told twice. You grab your hat, get up and leave the bar, abandoning us on our lonely stool. But our next Infohazard still awaits.
You like poetry? Japanese poetry, yes? The humble haiku. It's Dear 931, a unique Infohazard. It's so poetic.
Though specifically it takes the form of haiku. So what does that mean? A rigid structure. The first line 5 syllables, then 7, then 5. We can't talk about this in ways other than haiku. It is challenging. Object class is safe. It is kept at Site 19. Need 3rd tier clearance. So what is this thing? SCP-931. It is a rice bowl, white with a blue band and a cracked blue pattern, all inside the bowl. And we must confess, we took that one from the file. Man, haikus are hard. 3 inches in height, 4.5 inches across. Metric doesn't fit. No maker's marks found. Suspected to have been made late 1900s. Really makes you think on the skill of these poets. Sans Anomalies. Sure, it can't kill you, but writing these drives you mad. Curse 931. Trapped in this rhythm scheme makes the old man's torture world look like a resort. Okay, let's move on. other SCPs to see. We're sick of haiku. Okay, back to normal. Time to shake off the structures of SCP-931 and talk about another iconic Infohazard, SCP-3007. This incurable Infohazard is a lot less whimsical than a rice bowl that forces you to write and speak in haiku. In fact, it's literally killed 7 people, and some in surprisingly gruesome ways. The main component of the Infohazard is known as SCP-3007-1. This is an extremely vivid anomalous hallucination that affects those under the 3007 umbrella, known as SCP-3007-2. To be afflicted with SCP-3007 is a truly horrifying and debilitating condition. The hallucinations occur at an average of 4 times a day, with each episode lasting for as long as an hour. And during these episodes, the victims are at risk of grievous bodily harm, or even death. So the question now is, what exactly is the SCP-3007-1 hallucination? To the people experiencing it, they appear to be transported to a strange alien world consisting of a huge number of white towers or pillars stretching into the sky. SCP-3007-2 specimens are trapped on a series of bridges, incredibly far off the ground, that connect these various structures. This anomalous area is known as SCP-3007-3. It is important to remember that people transported to this world still remain, physically, in our own. However, any damage sustained with SCP-3007-3 will carry over into our own reality. To give one particularly gruesome example, some people fall from the precarious bridges and tumble to their deaths in SCP-3007-3. Back in our reality, they suddenly explode from the damage of an invisible high-speed impact, killing them instantly. There's much more to SCP-3007, enough that it probably warrants its own explanation, and the SCP Foundation takes it extremely seriously, believing that if the Infohazard is allowed to breach containment and become contagious, it could result in an XK-class end-of-the-world scenario. As a result, anyone found to be infected by SCP-3007 is contained and summarily terminated to reduce the risk of its spreading. To make things even worse, there are also concerns about SCP-3007-3 seeping into our reality, as those standing within a 2-meter range of SCP-3007-2 during a 3007-1 episode can actually hear the sounds from the terrifying hallucinatory reality. Okay, that was a little scary. How about instead of falling to your death without falling at all, we talk about a nice movie. Gonershrav by Martin Scorsese, one of the best gangster movies of all time. Wait, you've never heard of Gonershrav? It's got everything. Action, suspense, romance, a mountain of black thorns on which lives a dark tyrant of terrible and unknowable power. You sure you've never seen Gonershrav? Well, here's the thing. All signs point to movies like Gonershrav's and many others simply not existing. This comes as a result of SCP-2747, an infohazardous phenomenon that causes people to talk about works of fiction that don't exist. These works often feature commonalities, like an ethereal or disturbing tone, ambiguity, black thorns, and a sinister, mysterious antagonist. The Foundation is doing all they can to hunt down and suppress SCP-2747, but it's proving more difficult than they'd imagined. Currently, the leading hypothesis is that these tales may have actually existed once, but were erased from reality, leaving only the residue of memory and the odd scrap of evidence around. Many researchers speculate that the various pieces that form SCP-2747 are anafabula, pieces of fiction accidentally composed with the perfect elements to cause them to quite literally erase themselves over time. Now, the greatest concern that the Foundation has about these anafabulas is that they might actually be one, and their reality is on the precipice of collapse. But we really don't have time to unpack that right now, and like SCP-3007, a full explanation of this anomaly would take some time and is probably best tackled on its own. But there you have it, folks, Infohazards. They all say that knowing is half the battle, but in this case, it is the whole battle, and if you know, you lose. Not really a battle at all, come to think of it. More of a trap. But whether it's a vicious megafish, a strangely buff man with bull tattoos, a poetic rice bowl, or a nightmarish ordeal of daily hallucinations, there is no doubt that Infohazards are some of the most strange and fascinating anomalies that the Foundation has to offer. Oh, and of course, how could we forget the most well-known Infohazard of all, SCP-2521. This entity is so infohazardous that its Foundation file entry is written in pictograms. This is because whenever information is recorded about this entity, it manifests and steals it. If you write it down, it'll take the paper. If you make a note of it on a computer, it'll take the computer. And of course, if you talk about it, it'll... Oh no, 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 again, no, 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 no! Ah! Oh, that was a close one. But I'm okay. For now, at least. But don't worry about me. The Foundation regularly deals with anomalies of a more sinister nature. The most frightening among these, of course, are the ones that stalk and kill Foundation operatives. For no clear rhyme or reason, sometimes the Foundation's agents and researchers become subject to things that seek to entrap and utterly consume them. Dr. Elizabeth Graham is one such poor soul. Nowadays, her name is whispered through mess halls and cubicles, since no one really seems to know what happened to her. One moment she was carrying a stack of files between two offices, the next, completely gone. The Foundation's security teams couldn't figure out what happened to her. The CCTV cameras just showed her blinking out of existence and the files falling to the floor. Her biometric scanners simply returned a dead signal. It seemed that one day, Dr. Graham simply ceased to exist. Of course, the Foundation isn't above keeping secrets from its own personnel. Perhaps they did find something. A series of SCP documents, covered in sand, suddenly appearing in Graham's office one day, neatly stacked and paperclipped, all signed by her in her own handwriting, and detailing her days spent in a pocket reality of some sort. It wouldn't be the first time it had happened. The infamous Red Reality incident with Dr. Robert Scranton had already upset researchers, and there was no reason to alarm them further about something they couldn't change. So Dr. Graham's papers were covered up and relegated to long-term storage, where they would likely never be thought of again. But don't you wonder, what happened to Dr. Graham? The first thing Dr. Graham felt when she woke up was confusion. She didn't remember falling asleep. In fact, she didn't remember much at all. She had been moving files between two offices at Site 22 on a normal workday. She said hello to some of her coworkers and had a late lunch before returning to work. And then, nothing. The second thing she felt was fear. She looked around and realized she was in some kind of desert. A bright blue sky was overhead, and there seemed to be a sun, but all around her was sand. Massive sand dunes, flowing sand plains, and even what looked like a sandstorm in the distance. But all there was sand. Dr. Graham then noticed she was still holding some things. A small folder filled with paperclip documents. Pulling one out, she realized what it was. A template document for an SCP file, complete with sections for object class, containment procedures, and descriptions. This place was obviously not normal, but she had been anomalously transported to it. It needed to be documented. There was nothing else to do, so she sat down and began to write. She guessed at a number. Who knows what SCP the Foundation was on now? Might as well pick something for the middle. She scrawled SCP-3890 at the top and bubbled in Keter for the object class. The containment procedures were Spartan, but effective. No effective measures of containment were possible, and she would focus on simply exploring and finding out what was going on. Then came the description. No point in sticking to the Foundation's signature clinical tone, given the circumstances. It was more important to get the information down, and so she began to transcribe her thoughts. SCP-3890 is a potentially extra-dimensional or extraterrestrial space which I, Dr. Elizabeth Graham, was somehow transported to from Site 22 on 2/17/16. I'm uncertain as to whether I was transported here due to my involvement with the Foundation. After finishing the paragraph, she picked herself up off the sand dune she had landed on and started to walk in the direction of the sun. She didn't have much information, and exploring would be necessary if she was to accurately document the anomaly. It didn't take long before she came across something in the distance. An old, collapsed temple, completely ruined from the outside, the structure sagging in on itself. It had the columns and facades of a Roman building, she noticed. Peering inside, it was completely empty, except for more sand. In the distance, more ruins were present,
some older, and some more modern office-looking buildings. In terms of geography, SCP-3890 takes the form of a seemingly infinite desert plain, with ruins of differing architectural design poking out through the sand. I have noted the presence of buildings of modern design, along with what appear to be ruins of ancient Roman and Eryxian structures. She only noticed the first figure when the sun started to set. As the sky shifted to twilight, she saw a person walking, casting a long shadow. Excitedly, she yelled out, to no response. When she approached, she saw a man in an older suit with completely lifeless eyes stumbling along. SCP-3890-1 is my collective designation for the humanoid entities that wander through SCP-3890. They do not respond to any stimuli, and as far as I've been able to tell, simply walk around without a specific destination. SCP-3890-1 are either entities that have been created to resemble humans but imperfect, or they are humans who have been mentally altered in some way to rob them of their faculties. There did seem to be some kind of a day-night cycle, and she didn't feel hungry or thirsty at all, though she did feel sleepy. After her first day in the desert, Dr. Graham settled in one of the collapsed ruins, drifting off to sleep. The second document opens much differently. This appears to be a document for something designated SCP-3890-2 Keter. The containment procedures are simply to always, constantly be on guard for it, whatever it is. If Dr. Graham feels something she is approaching is not as it appears, she is to immediately retreat. The description is a little clearer. SCP-3890-2 is a living entity of varying shape and size, which resides in SCP-3890. I am uncertain as to whether SCP-3890-2 originates here, or if it was transported here at some point in the same way I was. From what I have observed of its behavior, it appears to be some form of predator. SCP-3890-2 is currently hunting me. I first encountered the entity shortly after writing down my initial observations of SCP-3890. It snuck up behind me while I was resting and got me while I wasn't paying attention. I was knocked unconscious by its attack and woke up several hours later during the night. It had attacked me several times since that first encounter, with several hours between each attack. She was caught off guard by it last night. She hadn't noticed its presence. It seemed to just be another building in the far-off horizon when she sat down and pulled out her pencil and paper again. She had started to fill in some more information about the humanoids. They seemed to continuously walk in circles around some of the ruins, though it was unclear to her why, or even whether they were aware of what they were doing. But when she pulled her pencil out, she heard the buzzing in her head. It was like TV static, initially soft and low, but then ramping up and quickly becoming deafening, stifling her ability to think. She looked up, and she saw it. For a moment, it retained its form as the building in the horizon, but that quickly changed. It began to unfold on itself, completely black on the inside, like a dark paper crane continually folding and unfolding, stretching and compressing in on itself. By the time Dr. Graham got to her feet and ran away, she began to realize what it had done and quickly scrawled it onto the paper. SCP-3890-2 uses amnesticization as a form of attack. While it has not injured me physically thus far, I have lost all memory of significant chunks of my childhood and early adulthood. I can no longer recall which high school I went to or what my first job was. My current hypothesis is that, as an entity, it feeds upon memory. At first, Dr. Graham avoided buildings and stayed to the empty parts of the desert while walking. But when the creature appeared again, unfolding out of what seemed to be a piece of paper, it became clear what it was: a mimic. In the coming hours, it would pretend to be a star, a human, a fly, even a patch of dirt, while trying to make Graham come closer enough to consume her mind. The next document opens in even more dire circumstances. The containment procedures have shifted drastically. Containment now focuses on making sure that the mimic does not consume any memories that Dr. Graham cannot afford to lose. She is to write down all vital memories so she can recall them if they do get destroyed, and watch for its presence in situations and at all times. She writes the document while huddled in a vault in a bank dropped into SCP-3890, since it offers a little security from the creature. But the corpses of a family in the bank imply something less hopeful. They chose to die by their own hand rather than let the mimic get to them. Graham plans to kill anything that tries to enter the vault to ensure that the mimic doesn't get in, but has bigger problems. I have lost all memories regarding how I came to be employed by the Foundation. I know that I am a Foundation researcher with level 3 clearance, but I simply cannot recall how I came to be in this position. Many of the SCP objects I worked with are also missing from my memory. I can tell there is a hole there, but I just don't know what was there before. Her memories of her own identity have been obliterated. Who she is, where she's from, what the Foundation even is, they have all been taken by the mimic. Without fail, it manages to surprise her and consume an important memory, then dashing away as she tries to figure out what got stolen from her. Something small, like her favorite food or her childhood bedroom, or something foundational and fundamental, like her name and her sense of self. And avoiding it isn't an option. It can pretend to be any of the single grains of sand in the boundless desert, and Graham came to the conclusion this is an infinite dimension of sand, serving as a hunting grounds for the mimic. Of course, it could be anything else too. A brick, a window, any of the buildings, any of the mindless wandering people, or the clothes on Dr. Graham's back. Any of them could be the mimic, and Graham thought of that too. It's why she hasn't let go of her knife in days, even though it's dripping blood from examining the corpses of the former victims of SCP-3890-2. Even though she doesn't need to eat or drink, there is another concern: sleep. The moment she falls asleep, the mimic will no doubt be upon her. She hastily scribbled down a little bit more onto the paper before trying to rest. The sun's going down. I can't allow myself to fall asleep. 3890-2 will come in without a doubt if I do. I don't have to eat, I don't have to drink, but I still have to sleep. This place is designed for the mimic's benefit. It can hunt its prey to its heart's content without them dying of thirst and starvation. Is this an enclosure maybe? Some kind of sick game? My name is Elizabeth Graham. I can't forget that now. This page is my memory. The next word she writes on that paper shows something ominous. She can hear crying outside of her makeshift shelter. The next document, things have changed. Someone named Tony is mentioned in the containment procedures, someone Graham trusts to take watch while she sleeps and watches for the mimic. The descriptions explain, Tony is a child, only 10 years old, who fell into this dimension, the same as Graham, when walking home from the playground. The mimic can imitate objects, but it can't speak. The boy is real. They've worked on a rudimentary password system to confirm each other's identities regardless. Graham feels almost hopeful. Their chances of survival have doubled, even though they're being hunted, not for their lives, but for the precious memories inside their heads. But she's still worried about other things. If people don't starve or thirst to death in SCP-3890, do they age? How long have the mindless humanoids been wandering around? How long has she been wandering around? Though she reminds herself of her training, she also faces the fact that she might have been exclusively picked for a past reason. I have this memory from my childhood still. Everything around it is gone, but it's sort of floating free, devoid of context. I'm visiting a woman in a hospital. I think it's a hospital, and I think it's a woman I know, a close relative, my mother or my grandmother, I think. And I go to visit her. I'm just a kid, 12, I think, and she doesn't know who I am. At all. I don't remember what happened before that or after. Perhaps the mimic brought her here because it knew she would hate having her mind consumed like this. But that would mean it wasn't just intelligent, that it was sadistic and cruel. She noted down she'd asked Tony if he had a similar experience, and they'd be a little closer to working it out. The document is hopeful. Dr. Graham now has something to believe in. The next document is a complete mess. Scribblings and scrawlings in the margins, and the text doesn't even begin to make any kind of sense. It's all word salad, the ravings of someone gone utterly insane. She mentions herself, her own name repeatedly and constantly, but in between are mentions of Tony, the Foundation, the mimic, and everything in between. Dr. Graham has lost her grip on reality. That or whatever wrote this wasn't Dr. Elizabeth Graham. The document after that has a very simple containment procedures. She is to kill SCP-3890-2, the mimic. Description: I woke up this morning. Tony was gone. He was the mimic. It was smarter than I thought, I guess.
I was stupid. I should have seen this coming, but I was desperate and it knew it. All it left was some scrawled document and a hole in my head the shape of my name. The mimic, disguising itself as a child, had stolen the last thing she had left, her name. All of Graham's precautions were useless. Even though her name was written down a dozen times in the last documentation, she cannot remember it. In fact, when she reads it, it immediately removes itself from her mind again. Not only has it taken her memory, it has taken her ability to reform them. And the document it left behind is one of her own, an SCP template. Though, of course, she doesn't know what the Foundation is anymore. The same document we have seen previously in the pile. Yes, the mimic is learning to imitate Graham and getting better at it. Maybe that's why she hasn't been killed yet. It's yet to pin down her thought process and is waiting until it has her perfectly memorized. Not that she would know, given that she's forgotten how she even came here or when. But the mimic made a mistake. It took everything from her, even her hope, which has left Dr. Elizabeth Graham a woman with nothing left to lose. She resolves she will not get out of SCP-3890. The documents will probably wind back up in Foundation possession from some testing with an unrelated anomaly, but she will be a mindless husk, or worse. She plans to kill the mimic. It's a cowardly, fearful stalker creature, and only hunts by pretending to be other things. She knows she can take it in a fight, and she still has her knife. The next document is sober. The object class, neutralized. Dr. Graham walked boundlessly through the desert until the mimic jumped for her. It unfolded from a cloud, turning into a mass of black origami and lunging for her. It didn't expect her to turn around and slash outward with her knife, piercing its strange black flesh. It let out a scream, shrank, and Dr. Graham realized that it could feel pain. So when it lunged again, she drove her knife deeper into it before pulling back. And she repeated the process until it was a tiny black mite in the sand, and then she crushed it under her heel. It was that easy, that simple. But of course, every time it had come close to her, it had taken another bite out of her mind, just as she took another slash at its form. We opened each other up. I filled its body with holes, and it filled my mind with them. There's not much left of me. She curses herself from not having done it earlier, but maybe there was a reason. She can't remember it anymore. In any case, the mimic's dying bites from her were particularly damaging, the straw that broke the camel's back. What's left of Dr. Elizabeth Graham is falling apart. She scribbles things down onto the paper, while her mind realizes that she can't even understand what she's writing anymore. The next document is empty. Not every story with the Foundation's agents fighting a monster has a happy ending. London is the second largest city in Europe, and underneath this bustling city is one of the oldest and largest networks of train tunnels in the world. But that's not the only huge old structure located beneath the city of London. Below even the deepest underground metro stations of this historic city, there's a whole artificial world of surveillance cyborgs, impossible architecture, and stomach-churning nutritional supplements. So be sure to mind the gap, because we're about to take you on a tour of SCP-1678, also known as UnLondon. SCP-1678 is located 1 kilometer below the city of London, England. From all appearances, it seems to be an exact copy of the city, though aesthetically, it's more in line with how it was around the turn of the 20th century. Gas streetlights stand on every corner, and the modern skyscrapers of the business district are recreated in the style of Victorian architecture. The epicenter of construction appears to be the Houses of Parliament, which is evidenced by the more unfinished and flawed the city becomes further out from the center one goes. Some of the buildings are made of nonsensical materials like copper pipes, and some of the gas lamps are nothing more than a ball of disembodied light floating atop a metal pole. The first big question that the Foundation had upon discovering this location was, of course, why on earth was it created? And they wouldn't have to look far, as an explanation of this bizarre mirror city plays automatically upon entering. My fellow citizen, if you are hearing this tape, then the world as we know it is finished. The sky has broken, the ground heaves with the tramp of terrible feet, and all the horror and madness from the dark corners of the world has broken free to exact its vengeance on the world of man.
Evil has raised its bloody flag upon all nations of the world and crowned its unholy victory to the broken sky. Yes, this is the end. But there is a new hope. Welcome to UnLondon, a city of survivors, a city of the free. Together, fellow citizen, we will wait and prepare for the new beginning, the grand new world that is soon to come. Let the world above burn. We will endure. Let the monsters have their world. We will prepare. We will wait. And I tell you, citizen, that there will be a new morning, and you will emerge from UnLondon and stand blinking in the sun. And on that day, citizen, there shall be a new order as we raise the Union flag over the entire world. I welcome you to UnLondon, the last city and the first.
From this message, it seems that this mirror city was built to be a refuge for survivors of an apocalyptic scenario. But the SCP Foundation had no knowledge of such a plan. In fact, it's still unknown who created this place, or how they did it. The one fact that was evident to the Foundation was that even though this strange place was intended to be a safe haven, it was far too poorly constructed to actually act as one. Illumination was unreliable, and most of the buildings were damp and infested with mold. It's also unclear to the Foundation where the oxygen and gas supply of UnLondon was coming from. Throughout the day, the loudspeakers around UnLondon play automated messages such as,
"No one is safe from the influence of mimetic beings. Bryson's Home for the Poor is here to help. And crime will not be tolerated in UnLondon. The tormentors of society will become its defenders."
At the end of every hour that passes, the speakers announce the time, followed by,
"And all is well."
When the SCP Foundation first entered UnLondon, it was unknown whether or not any living things inhabited the city. On first investigation, it seemed from its state of disrepair that the city had been long abandoned. But soon, the Foundation met their first inhabitant of the underground city. Mobile Task Force members were inspecting the area around the Houses of Parliament when they discovered what looked to be a bank. As they approached the doors, they heard the following announcement over the nearby loudspeakers.
"Citizen, you are entering a restricted area. Have your authorization papers ready. A Bobby will arrive to escort you shortly."
This signaled the approach of SCP-1678-A, also known as the Bobbies. A single instance of SCP-1678-A appeared with the unmistakable sound of a police whistle, and as soon as it arrived, it started attacking the members of the task force. Another announcement came over the speakers.
"Police, halt! Criminal!"
The Bobbies are the main threat to visitors in UnLondon, and they will attack on sight with any improvised weapon they can find. True to their name, they are all dressed in uniforms consistent with those of London City police officers from the Victorian era. What sets them apart from their historical counterparts is their construction. These beings are made out of human corpses, crudely dismembered at the joints, and reassembled using metal hinges and bolts with their heads wrapped in bandages. Bobbies are extremely hard to kill, with only high-caliber rounds and explosive weapons being effective at putting them down. Autopsies of dead Bobbies have shown that underneath the police uniform, the Bobbies all wear prison inmate-style jumpsuits. This adds a chilling context to the announcement about the tormentors of society becoming its defenders. It appears that the Bobbies are the reanimated bodies of prisoners. In addition to the Bobbies, the Foundation cataloged two additional forms of artificial life present within UnLondon. First are SCP-1678-B, or Eyes in the Sky, hybrid biomechanical birds made of flesh with an exoskeleton of copper wiring. Some of these creatures are covered in a deteriorating outer layer of plastic and feathers, suggesting that they were originally meant to resemble pigeons. As their name suggests, Eyes in the Sky serve as a type of surveillance drone, and while they have no offensive capabilities, they still pose a significant threat to the Foundation. It's still unclear whether they're able to communicate with or summon the Bobbies, but the SCP Foundation takes no chances. The last life form present in SCP-1678 is the strangest and the most frightening, SCP-1678-C, known as the Wretch. The Wretch has only ever been encountered outside the zone, which is now under SCP Foundation control, and it's uncertain how many instances of this being exist. The Wretch resembles an old woman, or sometimes old man, dressed in filthy rags. The wretch sits at street corners holding a begging tray and will attempt to elicit pity from anyone who happens to walk by. The wretch will ask for food or money, but if food is supplied, it will start weeping before vanishing into a puff of black smoke. On a few occasions, audio notices playing on the city's loudspeakers have alluded to this being, saying,
"Do not pity the wretch. Allow them to pay the price of their betrayal for all eternity."
The current Foundation protocol with regards to the wretch is to not engage with it at all. In addition to the bobbies, the eyes in the sky, and the wretches, there's another strange component to the world of UnLondon. Throughout the city, in any area designed for human habitation, the Foundation discovered multiple machines that resembled modern gas pumps. These machines are fitted with coin slots and rubber hoses that, when coins are inserted, dispense a porridge-like substance advertised as Dr. Goody's Wonder Food. According to posters around the city, Wonder Food is a meal replacement supplement, supposedly containing all of the required nutrients for survival. Wonder Food also appears to be the only food source available in UnLondon. Despite the claims by various posters around the city that Wonder Food contains all the nutrients you need and completely restores health and vitality, examination of this substance has revealed that it is, much like the rest of UnLondon, unsuitable for sustaining life. Tests have confirmed that Wonder Food is a synthetic starch gel heavily enriched with various minerals, vitamins, fats, and bulking agents, and it contains artificially engineered DNA helix structures. While it does contain all the elements required for short-term survival, consuming the product for longer than 6 weeks will result in severe malnutrition and eventually scurvy. Further tests have shown that Wonder Food also contains psychoactive properties. The porridge contains a mixture of unknown molecular compounds which, through regular consumption, make subjects calmer, less anxious, and less likely to resist authority. It also seems to have been engineered to cause withdrawal symptoms that set in if a person stops eating it, symptoms which include headaches and depression. Foundation personnel are forbidden to consume Wonder Food, but the substance is highly attractive to instances of SCP-1678-B and 1678-C. Like most things in UnLondon, the quality of Wonder Food varies wildly, with some dispensers putting out a product that is so degraded that it can cause sickness, deformities, or even death in the consumer. But strangely, the Foundation has also recorded a type of unknown colorful mollusk which feeds on spillage from the Wonder Food dispensers. At present, UnLondon is only partially contained. Mobile task forces Tau 4 and Epsilon 6 have succeeded in establishing a perimeter around the Hyde Park district, where they have managed to stop any incursion from SCP-1678-A. Even though this is the only area that is fully under Foundation control, explorations have been conducted of buildings outside that perimeter. The investigations are vital for the Foundation's main purpose in UnLondon, which is figuring out who built it and exactly what kind of event this underground mirror city was meant to prepare for. The interior of the Natural History Museum yielded particularly strange insights into the purpose of UnLondon. For the most part, the museum is close to how it appears in the above ground, but with one key difference. The task force investigating the museum discovered an exhibit called The Fall of Man, exactly where the Darwin wing should have been. The exhibit, as its name suggests, details the apocalyptic scenario that would have theoretically driven people underground into UnLondon. But to everyone's surprise, its dioramas and displays didn't depict an asteroid impact, plague, or nuclear Armageddon. To the Foundation Task Force members, the scenes of destruction depicted in the exhibit were far more familiar. They recognized the reptilian form of SCP-682, the ordinary-looking brownstone basement door that serves as a gateway to SCP-2317, and, most chillingly, the imposing many-eyed figure of the Scarlet King. These were only some of the known Keter-class SCPs depicted in the museum exhibit. It was clear that even though the SCP Foundation hadn't built this city, whoever did knew a lot about the SCP Foundation's activities. It's believed by the Foundation that whoever or whatever created UnLondon still resides in the Houses of Parliament, and the ultimate goal of the task forces is to infiltrate the building. But in order to do that, they will first need to find where the bobbies are made and halt their production. It's believed that Bryson's home for the poor is where they originate from, but it's unclear exactly where the materials to make them come from, nor is it clear just how they're produced. Ultimately, the Foundation's goal is to catalog the entire city, and once they have stopped the production of more bobbies, MTF Tau 4 and Epsilon 6 will storm the Houses of Parliament and contain whatever force has created UnLondon. But London is a very big city, and UnLondon is just as big, so there's no telling what else they might find exploring this bizarre location. Did you ever have to perform a dissection in school? Maybe you had to carve up a fetal pig, or slice into a frog while nightmarish visions of Kermit and a widowed Miss Piggy danced in your head. Though it's rarely a pleasant experience, unless your tastes are on the morbid side. Most biology teachers would agree that the best way to learn how something works is to take it apart. As distasteful as it can be to hold a frog's tiny liver in your hands, it definitely does give you a better sense of the pieces that make up the complete creature. But what if there was an easier way to look at the individual parts of a living being? What if you could take it apart without ever having to prep a scalpel or stain your hands with the blood of innocent frogs? Like most of the seemingly impossible things in our world, the SCP Foundation discovered something that allows its users to do just that. In fact, it can handle a lot more than just a frog, and its applications go far beyond the confines of a high school science lab. SCP-291 is a small, plain steel building with a large door on one side. The door has no handle or knob and functions similarly to a garage door. The door cannot be pried open by any ordinary means, and the inside of SCP-291 can only be accessed if the structure is connected to a suitable power source. Once a power source has been connected, the door races and exposes a room inside. It is small, about 4 by 2 meters. It contains a console board, a large screen, and a plexiglass container resembling a coffin. How very sinister. The coffin is large enough to contain a human under 7 feet tall. So sorry, Ferdinand the Cannibal, you're going to need to sit this one out. The coffin sits on a conveyor belt with several tubes connected to the wall above it. On the opposite side of the room, there are holes of varying sizes, each containing a small door that can be opened or closed. Because initial observation indicated that SCP-291 was intended for some kind of human testing, a D-class test subject was selected for experimentation. The subject was instructed to lie down in the coffin and wait to see what would happen next. The display screen lit up, depicting a grid-lined image of the test subject. Buttons along the console board adjusted the image, showing the skin, muscles, and organ systems of the person in the coffin. There were no words or numbers on the screen, and all of the buttons appeared to have only 2 settings, on and off. When one of the researchers pressed the first button on the console, the tubes above the coffin began pouring a blue liquid into it. The test subject reacted with confusion, but did not experience any adverse effects. They quickly lost consciousness, indicating that the liquid was some sort of sedative. The liquid continued to pour into the coffin until the vessel was completely filled, at which point it congealed into a thick gel. The test subject's breathing and heartbeat slowed to a stop, and the conveyor belt suddenly creaked to life. The coffin was carried, test subject inside, through a small door that immediately locked behind it. The small room was filled with the sounds of gears turning, machinery clinking, and motors whirring. The display screen was taken over by a large rectangle, resembling a traditional loading screen. After 30 minutes, the process was complete, and the back door of the room unlocked itself. When the researcher walked through the back door, they found another room with a conveyor belt and a row of 24 lockers. Each locker was opened, one at a time, and its contents removed for examination. Inside each, the research team found a different portion of the test subject's body, in a block of some unidentified clear substance. The body was divided in the lockers into these separate parts: brain, lungs and diaphragm, heart, digestive system, reproductive organs, left eye, right eye, upper left torso and arm, upper right torso and arm, lower left torso and upper leg, lower right torso and upper leg, lower left leg and foot, lower right leg and foot, lower left arm and hand, lower right arm and hand, neck and head, upper skeletal system, lower skeletal system, lymphatic and circulatory system, and skin. Phew, the miracle of the human body, right? Boundless in its fascinating complexities. Each block of body parts was placed back in its designated locker, and the second button on the console was pressed. At this point, the doors to the organ lockers sealed themselves shut, and the sound of the machinery working filled the small space once again. This continued for a duration of approximately 45 minutes. When the machinery went silent, a new plexiglass coffin emerged into the main room, with the test subject inside. He looked identical to how he had looked at the start of the experiment, with no evidence that he had previously been disassembled. The blue liquid slowly evaporated from the container, and the test subject opened his eyes. The lead researcher conducted an immediate interview with the reassembled subject, who reported no memory of the process after initial exposure to the blue liquid. They insisted that the process had been like a good night's sleep, which honestly makes us pretty eager to take it for a spin. A medical examination determined that there were only a few changes to the test subject during the disassembly and reassembly. When they returned to consciousness, the test subject's stomach was empty, they were naked, and all of their hair was gone. With this new understanding of SCP-291's anomalous properties, the Foundation decided to continue their experimentation. With each new test, the experiments became more creative and, unsurprisingly, more depraved. First, a D-class subject was placed in the coffin and disassembled. Then, instead of placing the various body parts in their designated lockers, the vital organs were removed from their storage before reassembly was attempted. This resulted in the equipment shutting down completely. A researcher pressed the third button, which forced a hard reset of the entire process, causing all of the blocks of body parts to eject via an exit hatch. During the next experiment, non-vital organs were removed before the subject's body was reassembled. The appendix and gallbladder were left out, and when the subject regained consciousness, these organs were still gone. However, there was no visible damage or scar tissue in their place. They were simply gone, as if they have never been there in the first place. So, if body parts could be removed from a test subject, could new body parts be added? Could existing body parts be replaced with different ones? A D-class subject in need of a skin graft following a flamethrower-based accident was placed in SCP-291. Once taken apart, a portion of healthy skin donated by another, somewhat unwilling D-class subject was placed in the locker, along with the skin already present there. Once the subject was put back together, the healthy skin had replaced the damaged skin with no adverse effects. Repeat attempts at this test showed that it was effective for limb transplants, heart transplants, and kidney transplants with a 0% failure rate across all tests. After determining that SCP-291 could be used for an untold amount of good, making organ donations easier and safer than ever, the Foundation naturally had to pivot to something more useless, but interesting and likely horrifying. After all, it's not like they could ever just make anomalous technology available to the public, right? 2 D-class subjects, 1 man and 1 woman, were disassembled by SCP-291. The brains of the test subjects were swapped, and then they were reassembled. When they awoke, the subjects had the personalities and memories of the brain placed in their body. In a turn of events previously only seen in blockbuster comedies like Freaky Friday and the live-action Scooby-Doo movie, seminal piece of cinema, the subjects had swapped bodies. They were subsequently disassembled, their request to look at their new bodies naked having been swiftly denied, and the brains were returned to their rightful bodies. After the experiment was finished, the subjects appeared mostly normal. However, they did complain of disorientation as well as mental and physical discomfort over the next several days. After going through 2 brain transplants in 1 day, though, that's really the least you can expect. After perfecting the practice of swapping body parts between different human subjects, the ghoulishly curious research team decided to take things in an interspecies direction. A variety of test subjects, including cats, dogs, lizards, fish, mice, and, of course, humans, were selected for this next round of experiments. 20 tests were performed using these new subjects, and only 3 of the experiments were successful in transferring body parts from an animal of one species to another animal of a different one. Attempts to swap body parts between mammals and reptiles or fish proved disastrous. When a fish and a human were both disassembled and the fish's gills were placed with the human's body parts, neither creature survived the reassembly process. The human awoke with a new set of gills embedded in their neck and immediately began gasping for the oxygen they could not take in. Within minutes, they had suffocated. The fish's fate was even worse. It did not reassemble so much as it became a pile of goo, scales, and 2 floating eyeballs. Experimentation with a human and a lizard yielded similar results, turning the lizard into a puddle of organic matter and killing the human test subject after only a few minutes. As disastrous as the failed cross-species tests were, the successful ones were almost as bad. Trial 001 involved a cat and a human. Not wanting to attempt too much at once, the research team opted to just swap out 1 organ, the left eye. Both subjects survived the transfer and were able to use their new eye. The human subject reported full use of the cat's eye, with improved night vision in addition to trouble seeing color. The cat did not enjoy its new eye nearly as much as the human subject, and had clawed its human eye out of its head by the end of the following week. In Trial 007, a successful brain transfer was performed between an adult human man and an English Mastiff. The man in the Mastiff's body expressed discomfort with walking on all fours, and asked to be returned to his body as soon as possible. The Mastiff in the man's body adjusted to bipedal locomotion in a few hours, but was disassembled after urinating on a researcher's shoes. The final successful trial, and the most unnerving, was Trial 016. A female D-class test subject's reproductive organs were swapped with those of a pregnant Labrador retriever. An ultrasound conducted after the transfer indicated that the Labrador fetuses survived the procedure and could conceivably be carried to term by the human subject. Several members of the research team began to take bets on whether or not she would end up giving birth to puppies, but the transfer was reversed within the day, so we'll never know what exactly would have happened. Perhaps that's for the best. Personally, we hope the Foundation's Ethics Committee gives some of these scientists a very stern talking to about their behavior on this one. When not in use for testing, SCP-291 is to be disconnected from any power sources. At least 2 personnel are positioned outside of its containment at all times, standing guard, and these personnel must be swapped out every week. When it is not connected to any power sources, SCP-291 is considered harmless, though it should still be treated with caution. The main entryway remains closed and locked when there is no available power source, but the door can be opened manually from the inside in the event of an emergency. Any disassembled organisms are stored in a locker in the containment facility, labeled with a Sharpie marker in order to keep track of what specimens are stored there. Whether this is the same Sharpie used to label food in the break room fridge is unknown, but just like Dr. DiRamiro's ham sandwich, it's best to leave these items untouched. Any personnel found to be responsible for missing specimens will be transferred to another project and receive a strongly worded email.
Growing up in a small Virginia town near the mountains right on the border of West Virginia, Zane heard all kinds of stories from his grandmother. Tales of mountain lions who could transform into ghostly women, the Talipo, a fluffy rodent-like creature on an endless quest to get its tail back from the hunter who took it, the Mothman that appeared with glowing red eyes to warn of impending tragedy. Most of all, she warned him about the deer. "Sometimes," she used to say, "when you're out in the woods late at night, you'll see a deer acting a little bit funny. Maybe it's making strange sounds. Maybe it's standing up like a man. Maybe it's staring at you from the shadows and won't look away. If you ever see one of these deer, promise me you'll get away from it as fast as possible. Don't look at it, don't talk to it, just get far, far away." He promised her every time, but as he got older, he started to forget his grandma's stories, letting them fade away with memories of the Easter Bunny and Santa Claus. He didn't think about the stories again until he was older, a junior in college and embarking on a camping trip with his roommate Josh. They were both staying with Zane's family for the summer and had been enjoying the sunshine and fresh air. They'd gone hiking, picked blackberries, and gone fishing to their heart's content. After a while, they got sick of sleeping in the cramped house and decided to have a proper camping trip out in the mountains. Campsites were crowded this time of year, but Zane knew a spot just isolated enough that they could kick back, enjoy nature, and relax in peace. They packed their supplies and headed out into the forest for a weekend they would never forget. By nightfall, Zane and Josh had pitched their tents, built a fire, and were starting to make some dinner. They roasted hot dogs and heated cans of beans over the fire, and decided to start telling some classic scary stories. Sitting by the crackling fire, listening to the rustling leaves, snapping twigs, and the chittering of animals all around, Zane couldn't help but remember the stories he had almost forgotten. All of the strange, inexplicable things that came out after the sun went down and the forest went quiet. He thought he could hear the footsteps of something walking by their campsite, circling them, but it was probably just his imagination. As Josh told stories about babysitters stalked by killers and drivers picking up ghostly hitchhikers, Zane was thinking about the deer. He shuddered but shook it off, and after some more stories and a few too many s'mores, the two friends decided to get some sleep. After several hours, Zane woke to the sound of Josh unzipping his tent. He sat up, ready to yell at his friend for waking him up, but the sight of Josh's pale, frightened face stopped him. "There's something here,"
was all Josh could say. His hands, Zane noticed, were shaking. "Hey man, it's okay, let's check it out." Zane patted Josh on the shoulder. He was pretty sure his friend just wasn't used to camping in actual nature, but reached for his hunting knife just in case. He grabbed a flashlight and switched it on, following Josh out into the darkness. He swept the beam across the clearing, and it illuminated a pair of orange eyes staring directly at him from behind a nearby tree. What the? He approached the shape, trying to get a clear look at it. As it became more illuminated, his stomach dropped. It was a deer, but something was wrong with it. Its mouth was wide open, its jaw working up and down like it was trying to make a sound, but nothing came out. But that wasn't the worst part. As the flashlight beam illuminated the animal's body, Zane realized that somehow its head was on backwards. What the? Josh appeared behind him, gasping. "Shh!" Zane shushed him intensely. He suddenly remembered his grandmother's warnings. "You know what? I don't feel so great. I think we should go back to the car and head to my place." He gave Josh a look, shaking his head as if to say, "Don't say another word." By the glow of their flashlights, the two packed up their campsite, all under the gaze of the misshapen deer. They drove home in silence, Josh only speaking once to ask, "What was that thing?" Zane shook his head. "I don't know, but it wasn't a deer." They crept back into the house and went to bed. They knew they would never speak of tonight ever again. As Zane began to drift off to sleep, his last conscious thought was to glance out the window. There in the yard, not 5 feet away, was a deer, watching. He didn't know it, but that night Zane encountered an instance of SCP-6448. SCP-6448 is an anomalous species of creatures that appear to belong to the Cervidae family, nicknamed the Not Deer. They are highly intelligent and can be distinguished from ordinary deer by unusual behavior and physical deformities. Some of these have included legs that bend backwards, the eyes of an animal other than deer, forward-facing eyes, jerky movements, lack of fear towards humans, and walking on 2 hind legs. Most notably and most frightening, SCP-6448 instances will watch and stalk humans for a duration of hours or even days. They will follow humans home and steal items from their domains, including weapons, food, and other personal items. They're most frequently found in the deep woods at night when a person is completely alone. If someone encounters an instance of SCP-6448, if they acknowledge any of the creature's anomalous traits, it will attack. In order to limit the loss of life and ensure that the SCP Foundation employees exercise the utmost caution when dealing with SCP-6448, the Cryptozoology Division issued the following guidelines. If you notice a deer that seems off, look away and ignore it. If it knows that you've noticed it, it's too late. If you hear your name, whistling, or something else in the woods calling for you, don't acknowledge it. Never acknowledge it exists. Don't respond. Don't go looking for it. Don't call back to it. If you're walking at night and you feel something breathing on your neck or whispering behind you, the key to your safety is pretending that everything is normal. Your survival is dependent on your ignorance. Whatever SCP-6448 is, they appear to be intelligent enough to understand when they are being studied, and they don't seem to like it very much. On January 11, 1994, a group of 3 SCP-6448 instances broke into Site 41 in North Carolina, using a tunnel they had carved over a long period of time. At the time, there was an instance in containment, but in all of the chaos of the breach, the specimen was lost. Every time an instance was captured and contained near SCP-6448's habitat, it would later escape via similar tunnels. SCP-6448 was officially classified by the SCP Foundation in 1980, but those from the Appalachian region have known about these strange creatures since at least 1947. From folktales and campfire stories to secondhand and even first-hand encounters, the locals are aware of the Not Deer's existence and are largely familiar with the precautions necessary to avoid them. Though many of the civilians that encounter SCP-6448 avoid notifying the authorities, there have been several recorded 911 calls involving the Not Deer since 2000. The following is a log of those calls. February 1st, 2000. Victim, age 41 female, dialed emergency services after hearing their name being called from the woods near their home. The victim recounts the vocalization being likened to a scream in a voice that they do not recognize and requested assistance in locating the source. Emergency personnel requested the subject place their phone on the floor outside the home to listen for the alleged sounds. After 2 minutes, a vocalization was heard that was calling to the subject by name, emanating from the nearby forest. The subject was instructed to investigate the disturbance themselves and keep services updated on the situation. The victim then began to walk into the woodland, getting about 50 meters into the underbrush before inexplicably stopping. They claim there to be a noticeably large deer standing in the way of the path. She begins to walk closer, though states it does not move. Subject diverts from the path and begins walking in a different direction. After 30 minutes, no source of the voice is determined. The caller returns to their residence. June 13, 2002. Victim, age 28 male, calls 911 regarding a home break-in. The caller notes numerous items to be missing from their residence and requests an investigation. Operators dispatch 2 investigators to visit the home and pertain a potential perpetrator. The pair note that based on earlier CCTV images, all cutlery, sharp objects, firearms, light bulbs, and a single copy of the novel The Day After Roswell are missing. Also noted is that there is a complete lack of any fingerprints at the scene, with no doors or windows having been broken into. Analysis of the home's CCTV footage revealed there to be a 2-hour period of missing film, with the exception of a single frame containing a Servus nippon on its hind legs reaching towards the camera. Its frontal hooves have been warped to resemble fingers. No footage of the entity exiting the home was discovered. November 19, 2005. A cattle farmer, age 54 male, reported to local authorities the sudden disappearance of over 30% of his largest herd. Response teams searched the nearby area for 4 hours, though found no trace of his cattle. The victim was recommended to set up trail cameras and note any unusual activity overnight. At 1:11 a.m., 2 SCP-6448 are seen walking through the field before fleeing. One places an object into the ground, later discovered to be a single fork. A week after this discovery, 200 discarded bovine hooves appear at the location. March 4, 2009. Victim, age unknown, gender unknown, dials 911 to request assistance from animal services. The victim is standing within a forest in front of a Servus elephas, which is violently contorting. The victim attempts to state, "You better get a vet or something, I don't think it's well," before a piercing screech is heard and the line falls silent. Recovered footage depicts the aforementioned animal squirming, seemingly in pain. A vicious churning is audible as a black mass erupts out of the instance, and the video turns to static. October 11, 2012. Victim, age 23 male, is a junior wildlife officer at the Cherokee National Forest, Tennessee. They radio their supervisor in the early morning regarding a herd of Odocoleus virginius within the reserve. Supposedly, there is a single animal that, upon first glance, appears average, though possesses divergent attributes, including backwards joints, enlarged abdomen, and forward-facing eyes. Upon stating this, a distant whistle is audible, and the victim stumbles slightly. They begin to say, "What the? Did it just whistle at me?" before the sound of hooves rapidly getting closer is heard. Notably, the hoofsteps did not sound to be in the traditional gallop of a cervid. October 12, 2012. The former victim's supervisor calls authorities following the victim's absence from the reserve night shift. Following this, their radio begins to crackle. The victim's voice can be heard on the other end, and he requests the supervisor's attention. He calls regarding a herd of Odocoleus virginius within the reserve. They claim there is a single animal that upon first glance appears average, though possesses divergent attributes including backwards joints, enlarged abdomen, and forward-facing eyes. Suspecting the creature to be a rare genetic malformation, the victim requests their supervisor to come to the location. The supervisor questions the victim about what happened the night previous. There is no reply. Upon the supervisor's and law enforcement's arrival at the site, a herd of approximately 80 Odocoleus virginius was present. A single entity is in the field's center and appears to be standing separate from the rest of the group. It flees the scene upon realizing the law enforcement's presence. Where it formerly stood lay a standard two-way radio. April 8, 2016.
Victim, age 35 female, dials 911 using a satellite phone distressed. They state they are in
Redacted.
County Woods and are being followed. She claims that despite seeing no one for the duration of her hike, she, quote, feels as if she's being watched and has heard someone walking behind her at various points in the trip. The victim is unable to give an adequate description of their location, but knows the route to return to her residence. Operators request the victim to return to a point wherein she can provide a sufficient geographic description of her position. The victim remains on the line for the duration of the hike back to a readily used portion of the wilderness trail. Along the journey, various unnatural sounds can be heard. These include footsteps, rock slides, coughing, whispering, and whistling. Nearing the main trail, all woodland noises such as birds and wind cease suddenly, and the victim states she can see a malformed deer carcass coated in a thick layer of black slime. At this time, human screams can be heard in the distance. Operators request the victim continue and ignore the other stimuli. Agents embedded in local law enforcement suspecting SCP-6448 involved notify Gamma 4 to the situation. 20 minutes later, the victim returns to the main trail. Gamma 4, now operating the 911 call, informs the victim not to respond to any further unusual activity and briefly outlines service protocol. For the duration of the victim's journey to her home, 2 sets of breathing are audible. The victim successfully returns to her residence and shuts the door behind her. Now out of sight from SCP-6448, agents inquire of the victim's address, and the victim promptly complies. Operatives instruct the victim to have possession of all firearms and weapons on the premises and to barricade herself inside a safe space with one exit point. The victim swiftly begins grabbing all available weapons and throwing them inside a wardrobe. It is at this time there's a knock on the front door. The victim does not respond and continues to hoard sharp objects from kitchen drawers. The knocking becomes more violent as the handle is jostled and is shaken incessantly. A voice on the other side repeats the phrase, "Hello, it is me. Hello, let me in a calm manner as the door begins to shake. The victim retreats to her wardrobe armed with a small firearm. Upon sealing herself in the space, the knocking ceases, and footsteps can be heard becoming further away. The sound of galloping is audible as the front door caves in. Hoofsteps can now be heard inside the home. The entity continues to repeat, "Hello, it is me. Hello, let me in," as it searches the small building. A bright light flashes overhead, seemingly circling the house. Eventually, the entity enters the victim's bedroom. Through a small slit in the wardrobe door, the victim can see a Cervus canadensis standing on its hind legs and surveying the room. Its movements are crooked and stiff, seeming to struggle to stand in a bipedal fashion. It slouches down to a quadrupedal crouch, similar to the stance of an arachnid. It inhales heavily, and its head locks on the view of the wardrobe. It is noted as possessing human eyes. It scampers towards the subject and opens the door. A single gunshot is heard. Responders found no trace of either SCP-6448 or the victim. Containment of SCP-6448 is focused on the investigation of any deer exhibiting anomalous traits in and around the Appalachian area. Any civilian sightings of SCP-6448 are to be handled by Mobile Task Force Gamma 4, or the Green Stags. Any possible deaths resulting from SCP-6448 will be blamed on hiking accidents, and any reported sightings can be explained away with chronic wasting disease. CWD, occasionally referred to as zombie deer disease, is a prion disease affecting members of the Cervidae family. Symptoms of the illness include loss of motor function control and damage to decision-making, as well as gradual degradation of all mental faculties. It is 100% fatal. However, though the disease does exist, most recorded cases of it in the Appalachian region can actually be attributed to instances of SCP-6448. Any captured instances of SCP-6448 should be transported to Site-44 for the Cryptozoology Division's containment and study. On November 29, 2019, they finally got their chance to bring a not deer into custody. The Green Stags were able to capture an instance of SCP-6448 with the help from MTF Nu 7 Hammerdown and their Heavy Vehicles Division, as well as some experimental shock rifles. One not deer was knocked unconscious in the conflict, and its body was loaded onto an armored helicopter and flown straight to Site-44 in Essex, England. At the site, it was then placed in a reinforced steel containment cell and heavily sedated.
This entire process went off without a hitch. As the entity began to regain consciousness, cryptozoology specialist F. Oz watched it through a one-way glass window and attempted to speak to it through the intercom. "Greetings, SCP-6448, Researcher Oz began. At the sound of his voice, the creature jumped to its feet, staring at the intercom. "Can you understand me? We've seen your genus speak English just fine in the past." The animal did not answer, but began licking one of its legs and behaving as if it were an ordinary deer. Researcher Oz sighed impatiently. "Please, we know your secret." The not deer stopped what it was doing, freezing completely still as it listened to the words. Admittedly, it wasn't exactly well kept. If you just look at yourself for more than a few seconds, it is very clear that you're not normal. At this, the creature, which had been facing away from the window, swiveled its neck 180 degrees, breaking its own spine with an audible crack. It stared unblinking at the window and directly at Researcher Oz. Oz turned to the containment staff, suddenly anxious. "I thought you said this was one way." The staff assured him that it was, and there was no way the not deer could see him. Still, its eyes were locked directly on his face. He shook off the sense of unease and continued his line of questioning. "Are you something imitating deer? It is clear that if so, you possess basic anatomical knowledge of them, though details are clearly faulty. In fact, a better question would be, how? If in fact you are not what you pretend to be." The not deer opened its mouth at this, revealing unusually sharp teeth. It moved its jaw as if attempting to speak, but only a choking sound came out. Shall we move on?" Oz asked. "What I'm more concerned with here is why you take our people. Is it a vendetta? Spite? Food?" For the first time in the interview, the not deer blinked. It was an unnatural movement, forced and deliberate, like the creature was attempting to engage in an ordinary behavior rather than actually experiencing an involuntary impulse. "Responding is mandatory," Researcher Oz prompted. The creature did not react. "If you will not comply," Oz's tone grew stern, frustrated, "maybe you'd like to see your brand new containment cell." At last the entity spoke. Research. Its voice resembled a distorted version of Oz's. "Research? What kind of—" Oz wasn't able to finish his question. "July 7th, 1947, the creature said before ramming into the one-way glass and cracking it. As Oz stumbled backwards from the force, the creature collapsed on the ground, seizing and screaming as its abdomen. "Get the stags in here now!" Oz cried out, but it was too late. A black mass of something shiny and tendrilled leaped out of the not deer, scuttling around the cell before shattering the window and leaving the empty shell of a deer behind. The Site-44 breach system activated and attempted to initiate emergency containment protocols, but the mysterious black mass escaped its sector, made its way toward the main exit, broke through the glass of the front exit door, and vanished into the shrubbery outside. The escaped anomaly could not be found and recontained. Ever since this incident, there have been a record-breaking number of chronic wasting disease cases identified in deer in the surrounding area, as well as an unprecedented increase in UFO reports. Further research is currently ongoing, but it is unknown whether we will ever truly know what these creatures are. Only one thing is for certain: they are definitely not deer. Agent Carla Mendoza was one of the best field agents that Site-41 had ever seen. She was professional, cool under pressure, and when the situation demanded it, she could be a straight-up badass. During a Chaos Insurgency raid on the site, she'd single-handedly killed 4 different insurgents, the last one with her bare hands. During containment breaches, she'd always be the first one charging into the fray, her Foundation standard issue Beretta drawn and ready to fire. Agent Mendoza was so devoted to the job that she took up the site director's offer to start living on site, so she could always be there to help if an emergency situation unfolded. After all, when it all hits the fan, you want someone as utterly unshakable as Agent Mendoza on your side. The job had thrown the worst of the worst at her and she'd never even flinched. So surely nothing could scare Agent Mendoza, right?
After a long day of kicking ass, taking names, and filling in the properly mandated amount of SCP Foundation debriefing paperwork, Agent Mendoza retired to her Site-41 quarters. She felt exhausted and sweaty, so before heading to bed to watch some wonderful SCP Explained videos on her phone, how kind, she decided to take a quick shower. The last thing she expected was for this particular shower to become, well, let's say, Hitchcockian. The water was running hot and clean, filling the air with steam. Agent Mendoza was lathering up her hair when she first heard the noise. Heavy, wheezing breaths coming from just behind the shower curtain. The second she heard it, Agent Mendoza felt a kind of brutal, crushing anxiety that she'd never experienced before, like a hand was reaching into her chest and squeezing her heart. The self-defense training that had been encoded into her muscle memory over years of working at the Foundation kicked into effect. In a blind panic, she struck out at the shower curtain, causing it to sway outwards and land directly on the face of Mendoza's wheezing voyeur. Who or whatever it was standing right there, less than a meter away from the shower. The wheezing carved into Mendoza's ears like a butcher's knife. What an awful, monstrous sound. And despite the fact that the shower curtain obscured its face, she could still somehow see it. The way a defenseless animal can sense an approaching predator without ever locking eyes on it, and just somehow know that it's too late for them to escape now. Every training session, every achievement, every piece of battle-hardening experience, it all evaporated in the presence of that thing. Mendoza was so terrified she might as well have been a child. The monster just stood there beyond the curtain, its raw, fleshy face parted into a freakishly wide, yellow-toothed grin. She didn't know how, but on some deep primal level, she was aware that if this thing got its hands on her, something horrific beyond description would happen to her. She was too terrified to even move a muscle in its presence. She remained like that, standing in the shower and sobbing quietly for the next 3 solid hours, until the creature finally disappeared. When her colleagues found her, she'd experienced moderate scalding wounds from the hot water of the shower. It took several hours for Agent Mendoza to compose herself enough to share her story. A couple days later, Tim Ellis, a junior-level filing clerk, was found trapped in a Site-41 supply closet. He'd urinated in his Foundation-issued slacks and was in a state of borderline catatonia. When his superiors asked him why he'd been spending 2 hours in a supply closet on company time, he reported that it was because a monster had appeared outside the door when he was searching for a replacement stapler. Despite never actually opening the door to see what was outside or call for help, Mr. Ellis said that he felt as though he would have had a heart attack if he actually opened that accursed door. He was able to provide a clear description of the monster. He said it was tall and emaciated, with reddish-brown skin that made it seem almost burnt or rotten. While it stood there and waited beyond the supply closet door, it let out the most awful wheezing noise, like an old, rusty iron lung. But the image that Ellis seemed most fixated on was the monster's face, or lack thereof. Just a huge, grinning mouth that covered up its entire head, stocked with an arsenal of massive yellow teeth. Ellis was visibly shivering as he talked about it. 2 incidents are an unpleasant coincidence, but 3 are a bona fide pattern. And it didn't take long for more sightings of this strange new anomaly, dubbed SCP-303 or the Doorman, to pop up across the site. It earned that name by always appearing behind some kind of doorway, or at least a movable divider, in the case of Agent Mendoza's shower curtain. Whenever it appeared outside a doorway, nearby Foundation personnel would report being struck with a sudden paralyzing terror that made engaging with the creature impossible. Attempts to call for help were also often stifled, as the very presence of the Doorman causes disruptions to electrical equipment. Whenever the Doorman manifests in your proximity, it's safe to say that it'll be commanding your absolute undivided attention. This was a particularly frightening case for the SCP Foundation, because it was one of the few anomalies bringing the fight directly to them. Most sentient anomalous beings would do anything to avoid getting captured by the SCP Foundation and contained in one of their high-security sites, full of experienced researchers and state-of-the-art equipment designed specifically to neutralize their effects. The Doorman, however, just seemed to take this as a challenge. turning even the most hardcore personnel on the site into gibbering wrecks with its mere presence. But the doorman was just getting started. Agent Henderson had a frightening encounter in the break room. He was pulling a long shift and just wanted to grab some coffee creamer from the cabinet. However, as he approached the cabinet, he heard the telltale wheezing and that terrible, overwhelming terror set in once more. The doorman was sitting inside the cabinet in a fetal position. He just knew it. Could this thing really appear just anywhere as it pleased, and keep people in or out until it decided to dematerialize and torment somebody else? When the creature finally dematerialized and the cabinet was examined, the coffee creamer was found to be missing, leaving Agent Henderson distraught. This was the first recorded instance of the doorman stealing a physical item, but it would be far from the last. Henderson wondered whether the creature that had just humiliated him was sitting somewhere else now, sipping from a warm cup of joe, with its big, freakish mouth and laughing at him. But a few incidents after this, things would become considerably more serious. The doorman was about to take its first life. Well, it isn't really that simple, if you want to get into the semantics of the thing. When the body of Dr. Barker was found inside the second-floor storage room after a spree of SCP-303 incidents, the question was naturally posed as to whether the doorman had gotten more dangerous and finally directly attacked one of its victims. Not quite. There had only been one way in and out of the storage room, a secured decompression chamber, and the doorman had appeared inside this chamber while Dr. Barker was in the storage room, effectively trapping him inside with the sheer terror it causes in its victims. He was trapped in the room for a grand total of 5 days, at which point he finally died of dehydration, and the doorman demanifested shortly afterward. The staff of Site-41 scaled up their countermeasure efforts, hoping to discover more about and perhaps even trap and contain the infamous doorman. Dr. Burroughs, Researcher Matthews, 4 members of security personnel, and 4 D-Class operatives formed a kind of strike team, ready for quick dispatches whenever the doorman happened to manifest. It wasn't long before the creature appeared in a room on the first floor, but the team quickly intercepted its location, ready and eager to gather more data on the mysterious being that had been terrorizing them all for weeks. Dr. Burroughs ordered one of the D-Classes to open the door and look inside, but the D-Class refused out of fear. The doctor told him that if he didn't open the door, he'd be transferred to SCP-682 duty. The D-Class frantically shook his head and said, "I'd rather take my chances with the reptile than go in there." The doctor was getting frustrated. He told the D-Class that if he didn't open the door immediately, he'd be terminated right there on the spot. The D-Class still refused, saying that he'd take death over what the doorman would do to him if he stepped inside. Without hesitation, Dr. Burroughs ordered one of the security officers to shoot the D-Class then and there. The shot was fired. The D-Class was terminated. Dr. Burroughs then ordered a female D-Class who just witnessed this callous execution to open the door, or the same abrupt death would befall her. She still refused, then began to describe the awful things she believed the doorman would do to her if she went inside. Researcher Matthews was visibly shaken by the description. Dr. Burroughs decided not to terminate this D-Class immediately. He instead wanted to see just how much pressure the doorman's anomalous fear-based resistance mechanisms could take. Another D-Class was given a combat knife, and also given the order to cut the female D-Class with it every time she refused an order to go inside. After 2 hours of repeated asking from Dr. Burroughs, the female D-Class dropped dead from blood loss. At no point did she ever attempt to open the door. It seemed that in all the cases for those in the thrall of the doorman's anomalous effects, death is a truly preferable alternative to ever facing it head-on. It's worth mentioning that these tests were conducted back in the 1970s, before the formation of the Foundation's Ethics Committee, which explains why their methods feel a little needlessly cruel. Since then, the doorman has fully commandeered the second-floor storage room, the same one where it caused Dr. Barker's death. It only leaves the room to steal more items from around the site. These items have included a cryotube, 3 sets of standard Foundation surgical equipment, 2 D-Class research cadavers, 1 gasoline-powered generator, a variety of chemicals from the chemical storage areas, and, of course, poor Agent Henderson's can of powdered coffee creamer. The reason for the doorman taking an interest in these particular items remains unknown, but we can only assume that nothing good can come of it. And there you have it, folks. The strange, frightening, and eerily inconclusive tale of the Doorman. All we can really say is that we're awfully glad he's fixated on bothering Site-41, because who knows what would happen if he widened his net to the rest of us. Thankfully, we won't need to think about that. Oh, that's odd. Can you hear that? I thought I was imagining it. Though come to think of it, I can't help but feel a little uneasy right now. Do you ever get that feeling that you're being watched? Wait, the door. There's something behind the door. Can you feel it? Can you feel its red flesh and rotten teeth pressing up against it, breathing, waiting? Can you feel it staring at you without eyes, looking deep into your very soul? Well, that's good, but just stay cautious, okay? After all, life has many doors, Ed boy, and you never know who or what will be waiting for you behind the next one.
Picture this. If you'll excuse that foreshadowing pun, you're at your local city mall in Ohio, a place that's never still. Every time you go there, no matter what time of day or day of the week, it's always full of people, all bustling about, shopping, eating, dashing past one another. Maybe, presumably like everyone else, you came in to get some specific item, or you might just be browsing. Heck, you could be there for a casual date, or to grab a bite to eat at the food court. That's when you remember you need to have your picture taken. It could be that your passport is about to expire, or your driver's license hasn't been updated since you moved. Whatever the reason, lucky for you, there's a photo booth right here in the mall. Take your own photo, boasts the sign on the outside of the cramped cubicle. A list of instructions below describing just how quick and easy the process is. You take a look at the price list, feed the right amount of money into the slot, and take a seat inside. Pulling the curtain closed, you straighten your back, look directly into the lens. A short countdown appears on the screen. 3, 2, 1. A flash bursts from the bulb above the lens, filling the booth, and leaving those white spots floating in your vision for a few moments. You head back out of the cubicle, waiting to pick up the glossy paper with your photos on it as it starts rapidly printing them off. You wanted a 2x2, 4 total pictures of your face. But then, as it finishes printing and you inspect the pictures, turning the paper in your hands, you're met with a surprise, an unnerving one to say the least. The pictures don't show your face. In fact, it barely looks like a human face at all. It has your clothes and your hair, but the whole image has been warped. Not just out of focus, but completely disproportional. Annoyed that you spent your money only to receive a highly distorted image, you wander off to find another booth, throwing the unusable picture in the nearest trash can. Now, sure, you might write off something like that as just an odd occurrence, a freak of technology caused by faulty machinery in desperate need of repair. But what you don't know, in fact you won't even realize until it's too late, is what really just happened. When you sat down and that flash went off, taking your picture and printing it off as a warped, unrecognizable mess, something was born. Located at the end of a series of long, winding concrete stairs and kept out of sight behind doors marked "Keep Out" and "Staff Only," is a lower level of the mall. Hidden in this dark, off-limits area that no member of the public is permitted to access, there is a service store, somewhere in the southwest corner of the 3rd sub-basement. Just taking a look at it, you could easily imagine nothing at all interesting behind it, like a power generator or a storage room. But if you were to push it open and venture inside, you'd stumble upon something you would never have expected in your wildest dreams, or more accurately, your most disturbing nightmares. Beyond that service door is a cavern, hardly the first thing you'd assume to be secreted away underneath a city shopping mall. Although if you're into cave jumping, it would be ill-advised to take a spelunking adventure down there. The entire cavern isn't actually part of our world. It's an extra-dimensional space. Think of it as its own little pocket universe that has somehow become connected to ours and can now be accessed through this doorway. If it helps, you can even picture our universe as a big soap bubble, with a slightly smaller bubble attached to it. In actuality, it's infinitely more complicated and looks nothing like 2 bubbles of different sizes, but like we said, if it helps to picture it that way, then go right ahead. If you were brave enough, or naive enough, to venture deeper into this cave and not to be put off by its walls that look like they've been carved from pure limestone, then you would have had to watch your step to avoid a nasty fall. Within the large cave space is a deep, dark pit, a rocky conduit in the ground, seemingly leading down into the earth. But taking a closer look, the walls of this pit aren't made of rock. They don't even match the limestone that the rest of the cavernous room looks to be cut from. The surface of the pit is coated in a slimy substance, closer to something biological, coming from a living thing rather than being carved out of rock. Depending on your familiarity with the texture, you might even say this substance is not all that far off from the appearance and feel of human fat tissue. Although you probably shouldn't reach in to try and touch it for yourself, least of all because the walls of the pit are constantly secreting a corrosive substance like acid that could easily break down your body by its molecules, painfully burning you until you melted down into soup. But there's something else down there. Lots of somethings, as a matter of fact. And the moment you took that photo, sitting in the safety of the booth in the mall above, a new something found itself born into the pit. It looks almost exactly like you, but its face is all wrong. You could even say distorted, like a photograph that didn't quite come out right. The abnormalities in its face could take the form of lacerations, cuts and open wounds, or bloody welts, like looking in a mirror at a twisted, injured version of yourself. Or this imperfect copy might have growths bulging out from its head, covering its facial features to make it virtually unrecognizable as a clone of you. Then again, maybe it'll just come out missing everything. No eyes, mouth, nose, just a blank, expressionless mask on a body otherwise identical to yours. And what does this thing, this clone, do now that it finds itself in a pit filled with other writhing, imperfect copies of everyone that's ever sat to have their picture taken in that photo booth? Well, what would you do? You would try to get out as quickly as possible, and that's what it will start doing. While you're going about the rest of your day, maybe stopping off at a few stores in the mall or complaining to the customer service staff about that faulty photo booth, it's already started climbing. Its fingernails are digging into that fleshy tissue that coats the walls of the pit as the copy drags its imperfect body upwards, crawling over the others around it that are trying to do the exact same. There's no telling just how many of them are down there, how many misshapen heads and deformed faces your clone has had to barge past and climb over as they all pile deep down within their hole in the ground. And what's the worst part of all this? It's not just the climb. The fact that your copy has to fight its way out of the pit, making the near impossible ascent to make it to the surface. No, the worst part is that you have no idea it's happening. You're completely oblivious that a distorted clone of you is raking its nails against walls of fat tissue, clambering up from underneath the ground, and even more so, you have no idea what it wants to do when it gets free and finds you. The SCP Foundation has long since been keeping an eye on the anomaly that they themselves have designated as SCP-715. Given that the photo booth itself was connected to the extra-dimensional space buried deep below the mall, removing it isn't really an option. Sure, they could have easily have cordoned it off and put up signs saying the booth was out of order to deter members of the public from trying to use it, but this was the SCP Foundation after all. They needed to run tests, figure out exactly what this anomaly did, and how it ticked. Gerald Patton had been a rising star at the Foundation, a promising researcher who had long been proving his mettle since he first became part of the organization. For a time, the higher-ups at the Foundation had planned to attach the researcher to the SCP-2090 project, studying a basketball player who somehow gained anomalous powers. However, hearing about the photo booth in the Ohio City Mall, he turned down this request to instead join the team researching SCP-715. Certain high-level staff of the SCP Foundation noted this to be strange. Patton had never turned down a promotion before, as the SCP-2090 project would have offered him better pay and more vacation time. In order to observe the photo booth closely without alerting the public to their presence, Foundation staff on site were disguised to blend in with civilians, and some posed as retail staff employed at the mall. Come closing time, once everyone else that worked there or who had been shopping throughout the day had finally left, the Foundation researchers were free to run their tests and investigate the anomalous photo booth. It was the night of a routine sweep. All staff members on site were required to test the surrounding area for reality warping anomalies. The sweep was mandatory for the entire team assigned to SCP-715, yet quite unusually, researcher Patton didn't report in for the procedure. The higher-ups at the Foundation decided to let this indiscretion slide though. After all, there were a lot of personnel involved in the process, so Patton was let off the hook. In fact, the few disparities in Patton's behavior only became more apparent when Dr. Agatha Wright began to more closely collate and process the files and information on the personnel on site. She was the research head on the SCP-715 project, and quickly noticed a few things that didn't add up about researcher Gerald Patton. His rejection of the offer to join the SCP-2090 project and refusal to attend a routine reality-bending anomaly sweep might have seemed like unrelated incidents at first, but both would have brought the researcher into contact with technology that the Foundation used specifically to detect any distortions to reality. If he had taken the promotion or been present for the sweep, he too would have been within the scope of this specialized detection equipment. Yet both times, he managed to avoid being put in such a position. What the hell was Patton hiding? And what would show up if a detector was pointed at him? Dr. Wright was growing ever more suspicious of researcher Patton and his behavior. However, it was when she learned he had secretly tested the photo booth himself that she decided to take matters into her own hands in order to get to the bottom of what Gerald was up to. She had to mull it over and think about things cautiously. She couldn't confront him directly, at least not yet. Even the evidence she already had, that Patton had seemingly twice avoided situations involving the use of reality distortion detection equipment, wasn't enough to prove for certain he was hiding something. Both instances could have been caused by something completely unrelated. Gerald could have rejected his promotion purely because he was more interested in SCP-715 than joining the SCP-2090 project. And even Foundation personnel needed sick days or skipped work because of a hangover without telling anyone, which could explain why he was absent during the sweep of the mall. But Agatha wasn't convinced. It felt like the two instances lined up too closely. They felt far too similar to be an utterly random coincidence. Even if Gerald wasn't up to anything dangerous, the only way to know for sure was to observe him, but without drawing attention to it. He'd deny anything, act completely differently, maybe even flat out lie if he knew someone was listening or watching. Agatha was forced to think in a way that was as calculated as she was certain Gerald had been. His quarters were located in a secluded part of the sub-basement, a level above where the fleshy pit could be found. Almost all the Foundation personnel assigned to SCP-715 slept somewhere on site, their presence there masked from the ordinary mall employees. Taking care not to be detected, they had installed doors with a keycard system, meaning only members of their own staff could access the living quarters under the mall. If any civilians happened to stumble upon the Foundation and discover them, then all it took was the careful application of amnestics to ensure that they wouldn't remember a thing. Beeping her keycard at the door, Agatha slipped into the living area. It mostly consisted of a narrow corridor with rows of doors on either side. Behind each one was a cramped room, each only big enough for one person, a bunk to sleep in, and a sink with a mirror above it. Gerald's room was the furthest from the entrance, right down at the end of the corridor, as far from everyone else as he could get. Although it also meant if he came back from testing early, then he'd be more likely to catch Agatha leaving his room and walking back along the row. It would be hard to come up with an excuse as to what she was doing anywhere near his quarters, especially as her room was right behind the very first door, right next to the entrance. All this was rushing through Dr. Wright's mind as she squeezed into Patton's room. In actual fact, the interior space of them was so limited that they were even smaller than most ship cabins. Her hand had been clasped around the handle of a metal case, which she sat down on Gerald's empty bed. Unclasping the clips that held it closed, Agatha opened up the case and took out what was held inside the inner layer of protective foam. It was the Fulman Breaker Anomalous Optical Enhancement Device, a piece of the specialized apparatus that Foundation researchers use to record and identify any person or object that might be exhibiting anomalous properties. It utilized state-of-the-art optical enhancement technology and could be used to detect whether a subject was causing any distortion to the reality around it by accessing visual spectrums that were normally imperceivable to the naked human eye, or sometimes even unobservable in this dimension. Agatha looked around the tiny cabin. Given the limited space, she was also short on options as to where she could hide the device without it being easily noticed. It was also imperative that researcher Patton had no idea he was under observation. Dr. Wright looked over to the sink in the corner, the mirror just above it. Sure, it was a tactic taken straight out of the big book of spy novel cliches, but it would work. The advanced spectrum capabilities of the optical enhancement device would be able to record Patton through the glass. Luckily, the entire living quarters had been pretty hastily built, which meant it took little effort for Agatha to loosen the screws holding the mirror in place. But that's when she heard the distinctive beep of the door to the living quarters, followed by the gradual footsteps getting closer and closer. It might not have been Gerald, but there was also an equal chance that it could have been. Acting as fast as she could, Agatha placed the optical enhancement device on the wall and covered it with the mirror, frantically trying to screw it back into place as quick as she could. The echoing noise of someone approaching sounded as if they were almost right outside the cabin door by the time Dr. Wright had tightened the screws enough to keep the mirror in place. Giving a quick final scan of the room, making sure nothing looked too conspicuous, she grabbed the empty case and smoothed out the duvet where it had been laying, leaving no trace that she had ever been there. Her heart already racing, it almost exploded right out of her chest as she slipped back out of the door to Patton's cabin, only to see him walking down the narrow corridor directly towards his room, towards her. Dr. Wrights, Gerald greeted with a stage smile, though the suspicion on his face was so unmistakable that it could have probably shown up clearly on camera. Something I can help you with? Patton. Agatha gave a polite nod back to the researcher, lifting the case behind her back. The one upside of the tight corridor was that Patton was so close to her, he couldn't see what she was hiding. The obvious downside being he might be close enough to clock Dr. Wrights' suspicion of him. Did you need something? Patton chuckled. Sorry, it's just, what were you doing in my quarters? Her heart was still racing, desperately trying to form a plausible excuse somewhere in her mind. Agatha's free hand reached into her pocket, something brushing against her fingertips. It would have to do. You dropped this, she exclaimed, pulling out a $20 bill and handing it to Gerald, a small price to pay to keep her subterfuge. Earlier on in the mall near SCP-715, I saw it fall out of your pocket. I had other matters to attend to down at... Anyway, I wanted to make sure you got it back. Oh, thank you. Gerald blinked in surprise, taking the money. As she squeezed past him and walked out of the living quarters, Agatha could barely stop her hands from shaking, although those tremors of nerves would have to become the trembling of absolute horror when she saw the footage that the optical enhancement device collected. Patton was one of the creatures from the pit. It didn't seem possible. He didn't even have clearance to know about the pit, and any of the clones or SCP-715-As that managed to claw their way up to the surface were immediately terminated by on-site security, the instances becoming known as SCP-715-Bs if they made it that far. Yet somehow Patton, or whatever he really was, had made it through undetected, but that was far from the worst discovery Dr. Wrights would make. She used a number of the same anomalous optical enhancement devices to observe the SCP-715-A creatures within the pit, only to find that she and the other researchers had made a grave mistake. The SCP-715-As, they were all humans. What the Foundation had initially thought were the distorted, imperfect clone copies of everyone who had used the SCP-715 photo booth were actually the originals. They had been trying to climb back up because they wanted to come home. Their places taken by SCP-715-Bs. But none of those people, now twisted, disfigured, and unrecognizable, were able to explain to the Foundation who they were, and they'd been shot, left to fall back into the pit and die. Acting fast, Dr. Wrights updated the classification of SCP-715 to Keter, although this was later rescinded back to safe. The creature that looked like researcher Patton was apprehended and brought in for interrogation. After learning the truth behind SCP-715, the photo booth was secured and locked up permanently. But as of now, the project investigating SCP-715 has been put on hold. No one at the Foundation wants to admit their mistake, that they now have an extra-dimensional pit full of innocent, distorted people, or that they have no idea where all their body-swapped counterparts are. Throwing indestructible lizards into vats of acid, hunting strange chicken men through forests in Ireland, arguing in Latin with a man wearing a haunted Roman centurion's helmet. When you join the SCP Foundation, you might be expecting high-octane drama all the time. Especially with the name Street Sweepers, you'd expect this mobile task force to be neck-deep in some real action-packed street racing. Maybe you wouldn't think that they'd be tasked with driving all day, every day, in 4-hour shifts, tailing a semi-truck all over Birmingham, Alabama. But as Agent Moore and his colleague pulled into the lay-by behind the truck, Neither of them were ready for what they were about to witness. SCP-2590 was first discovered by the Foundation at a routine traffic stop. Investigating a totally different anomaly in the Birmingham area, Agents Peters and Smith had been posing as local police officers. The Foundation had been trying to track down an artifact that was supposedly being smuggled across the US in the back of a nondescript station wagon. Peters and Smith had been allocated a pair of beat-up old police cruisers, which they'd parked across the dirt road, fully blocking any traffic from coming through. It was several hours into their shift when the incident occurred, just at the point they were starting to lose focus. Taking a look through the suitcases and memorabilia from a family's trip to Disney World, Peters had taken way too long to hear the noise of the engine swelling behind him. He spun around to see the hulking shape of the semi-truck barreling straight towards him, Agent Smith, and a family of 5. With only 2 seconds to react, he yelled out at the top of his lungs and dived out of the way, leaving the trunk of the car wide open with 5 screams emerging from inside. Smith, who had been sitting in one of the cruisers, only just managed to get out before the semi made contact. Eyes closed, Agent Peters waited for the inevitable sound of screaming rubber, the bang of metal on metal, and the shower of glass on asphalt, but it never came. When he opened his eyes, the station wagon was still parked up in front of them, the 2 police cruisers still blocking the road, and all of the Disney merch still piled high in the trunk. The semi was driving off along the road on the other side of their blockade, with not a scratch on it. Without a moment's hesitation, Agent Smith, who had kept his eyes open and witnessed the whole thing, leapt into action. He ordered his partner, still lying confused in the dirt, to administer Class A amnestics to the family and call in for backup. Agent Smith himself jammed his keys into the ignition, twisting them so hard he almost bent the metal, and took off after the vehicle. What Agent Smith and Peters had just witnessed was the very first Foundation exposure to SCP-2590, fondly nicknamed Trailer Trash. As Smith pulled up alongside the vehicle and studied it for the first time, he made a note of its initial appearance over the radio, an appearance which remains unchanged years later. The badges on the vehicle claim that it is an International ProStar day cab semi-trailer truck, complete with an unmarked trailer. As the agent flicked on his lights and indicated that the vehicle should pull over, he noted that it didn't have any license plates on it, either front or rear. He leaned forward in his seat, trying to peer into the cab to make out the driver, but in the Alabama sun, the man just looked like a shadowy figure. They drove side by side along the road for almost a mile. The truck made no signs of pulling over despite Agent Smith's continued insistence and repeated flashes of the cop lights, but it also didn't attempt to pull away either. It just continued to drive a few miles per hour below the speed limit. The driver didn't seem to look across at him once. Having discussed it with Foundation staff, they decided it was best not to draw attention to the situation. They had no idea whether this SCP was hostile or posed any threat to civilian life, but having blue and red lights flashing at it appeared to be doing little to change the situation. Instead, he switched off the sirens and pulled in behind the truck, tailing it around Birmingham as the Foundation readied further agents to respond to the situation. For almost an hour, nothing of note happened. Agent Smith drove behind the trailer, watching it like a hawk. He observed that it obeyed every traffic law to a T. It never broke the speed limit, never cut anyone off, and left room for other vehicles to merge. If it hadn't seen it drive straight through a roadblock as if it wasn't there, he would have never suspected a thing. But then the truck turned its turn signal on. They had just come off the highway and merged onto a quiet side street, just as the sun was starting to hang low in the sky. The truck crept across the side of the road, squeezing its brakes gently, and stopped. Agent Smith matched the action the whole way, pulling up about 20 feet behind the trailer. In constant radio communication, he kicked open his door and stepped out into the evening air. Foundation personnel advised that he keep his hand on his gun at all times and approach with caution. He didn't really need them to tell him that. Smith called for the driver to step out of the cab. No response. The truck just sat there with its hazards on, engine off. After a moment, there was a clunk, and the trailer door started to slowly open, all by itself. Agent Smith called in backup, but they were still several minutes out. Instead, he ran back to the car, gun raised, and waited to see what was inside as the door slowly opened to reveal nothing. No, not quite nothing. There was something small on the floor of the trailer, right in the center as if it hadn't been moved around at all by the vehicle's motion. It was red, a kind of elongated cuboid. He reported it all to the Foundation over his radio, then paused when he recognized what it was. A Kit Kat candy bar, or to be more specific, a Kit Kat Chunky. What happened after this point was hazy. Agent Smith was found on the roadside just 20 minutes later, confused about what had happened. The truck was nowhere in sight. However, a security camera from a convenience store just up the street happened to capture the interaction. In the footage, you see Agent Smith approaching the trailer with his gun raised, looking at the Kit Kat. He tries to enter the trailer, but is unable to, so he approaches the driver's side door. While talking to the shadowy figure in the cab, he drops his gun and stands motionless, a confused and sleepy expression on his face until the trailer door closes and the SCP drives away. Contact was reestablished with SCP-2590 soon after and has been maintained almost uninterrupted ever since. The findings made on that initial encounter seem to hold true across further examination. Personnel have reached out to Navistar International, the company that supposedly manufactures this model of semi-truck, but there appears to be no records of its creation or shipment to the US. In fact, no documentation at all can be attributed to the truck or any components on it. The driver in the front cab is a humanoid figure who is perpetually shrouded in shadow, designated SCP-2590-1. Attempts to reveal the driver's figures have proved ineffective, as even powerful spotlights do not shed enough light into the cab to render the driver visible. Quite what this driver's role is in the operation of SCP-2590 is unknown. SCP-2590-1 appears to have some proximity-based amnestic qualities, as anyone approaching it on foot has reported memory loss and confusion soon after, just like Agent Smith. As also discovered by the two agents and their roadblock, containment of this SCP is simply not possible. While the majority of the time the SCP is corporeal, it possesses the ability to pass through solid objects at will. All attempted roadblocks have resulted in the same thing happening. The SCP will just phase right through on them as if nothing was there. Since it cannot be contained in the usual way, a different operation has been set up to monitor the truck's activities, which so far have proven to be apparently harmless to the civilian population. Mobile Task Force Gamma-133, also known as the Street Sweepers, has been established to follow this SCP around Birmingham at all times. They operate in 4-hour shifts, with 2 agents in unmarked vehicles sticking close behind the trailer at all times. The Foundation was able to fit a tracking device onto it as well, providing researchers with continuous location data for where they can find the vehicle. At seemingly random times, supposedly determined by the SCP itself, it pulls over somewhere quiet and opens the door to its trailer. The door will remain open for 60 seconds and then close again. Any attempts to enter the trailer have been blocked by some kind of invisible barrier, seemingly impenetrable to most approaches. More violent and destructive methods of entry cannot be authorized for testing, due to the heavy civilian population in the surrounding area. Every time the doors open, there is something different in the trailer. Researchers are trying to ascertain some kind of pattern or messaging behind most of the objects, but many seem to be random. The current list of things that have appeared in the back of SCP-2590 include an iPhone 3G, a red apple, and a lit light bulb without any visible form of power supply. Most notable about the objects in the trailer is that often they appear to be human beings, as happened on the night that Agent Moore was on duty in the Street Sweepers. The agents pulled in behind the truck as per usual when it slowed to a stop beside the highway. Agent Moore got out of the vehicle second, unenthused about the monotony of the task he had been assigned. Expecting to see a cardboard box or a chapstick when the trailer door opened, he was left shocked when he came face to face with himself. Few people can say they have seen themselves in real life. Most of them have been administered with various amnestics to make them forget, but Agent Moore went on to report how bizarre of an experience it was. He claimed that it was utterly unlike looking in a mirror where your reflection is flipped and follows your every move. Seeing yourself standing in 3 dimensions, moving independently and evidently in a great deal of distress, is an experience that few would envy. Anytime a human being materializes in the trailer, they appear to be in a great deal of distress as they attempt to escape through the invisible barrier. Agent Moore and his partner Agent Hall could do nothing but stand and watch in confusion as the copy of him attempted to free himself before, after the usual 60 seconds, the trailer door closed and the vehicle pulled away again. Several instances have occurred of duplicate humans appearing in the trailer, but each time the original person seems to have had no knowledge of this taking place, and nothing out of the ordinary happens to them. However, there appears to be some small pattern demonstrating the SCP has an awareness of the Foundation, as it has also duplicated Agent Inglis's sister, who has no connection to this SCP at all. Incident 16 was the most distressing of all, as a large slab of metal appeared in the back of the trailer, with the SCP Foundation logo painted across it. Agent Inglis and Schultz were on duty at this time, and observed copious amounts of blood flowing out of the metal slab. Before long, the blood filled the back of the trailer, pushing up against the invisible barrier. All of a sudden, 52 seconds into the encounter, the barrier vanished, and a cascade of blood with the slab inside were launched out at the two agents at a speed of over 190 kilometers an hour, killing them both instantly. Since this incident, SCP-2590 has been treated with greater caution. The most mysterious thing to have come from researching this truck came on December 4th, 2011, when, for the first time, the truck's tracking beacon stopped working. It had been seen pulling into an abandoned warehouse, and so a team of street sweepers was immediately dispatched to investigate. When they arrived, they found the vehicle moving through the warehouse at a slow crawl. Choosing to pursue on foot and leave a pair of agents at the entrance, they followed the SCP through the facility until it came to what agents described as a service tunnel or sewer of some sort. Putting headlamps on, they followed the truck down into the tunnel, maintaining radio contact throughout. As they reported the direction they were traveling and the distance, it quickly became apparent to Foundation personnel that this was no ordinary tunnel. The warehouse was positioned overlooking a cliff, and so the geography was not physically possible. As the street sweepers descended further into the tunnel, they noted there was increased levels of carbon monoxide. Radio contact started to dip in and out, losing signal as they went further downhill. Just at the edge of their signal with the Foundation, the truck stopped and opened its trailer door. Inside was just a single piece of parchment with the words, "I'm just delivering a message," written on it. After the usual 60 seconds, the trailer door closed, and the truck continued. After they had passed the kilometer mark, the radio signal worsened quickly, and after a couple of scrambled messages, the team down there were not heard from again. The channel stayed open for another 6 hours before the Foundation made the decision to announce the agents missing in action. In March 2015, over 3 years later, a radio signal came into contact with the Foundation again from Birmingham, Alabama. It was from the headset of the squad leader who had gone into the tunnel. Initially confused as to who had gained access to the comms channel, the Foundation demanded that the agent state his full name and rank. The agent, himself confused, obliged, questioning why they were so suspicious. He and his team claimed to have only lost contact for about 15 minutes. They had followed the SCP a little further until carbon monoxide levels had risen too high to continue, at which point they had watched the truck disappearing into the distance as they walked back to the surface. All agents have undergone extensive psychological rehabilitation to settle them back into society, as well as classes to fill them in on things like the London Olympics, the Ice Bucket Challenge, and Gangnam Style. As for SCP-2590, it is back out on the roads, roaming around Birmingham, Alabama continuously, never stopping for fuel, always obeying the rules of the road, occasionally opening its trailer doors to reveal new and bizarre findings.
In June of 1985, Mark Johnson and his wife of 10 years, Sophie, were on vacation in Myrtle Beach having a great time. While they relaxed on the sand, Sophie decided to take a picture of her husband for their scrapbook. So she pulled out the Polaroid Supercolor 645 that she'd bought specifically for the trip. She pressed the button, waiting for the picture to print, pulled it out, and shook it. What she expected to see was a shot of Mark lying on his beach towel. What she got was a picture of her husband in the arms of his secretary. They say that a picture speaks 1,000 words, but this particular camera takes pictures that are worth even more than that. When developed, the pictures taken with this normal-looking Polaroid camera reveal the innermost desires of the person being photographed. Welcome to the story of SCP-978,
the Desire camera. The main reason the Foundation keeps SCP-978 under wraps is due to its use as an easy form of blackmail. All anyone with access to the camera would have to do is snap a few covert photos, and they'd have instant dirt on the world's most powerful people. To further stop this camera from falling into the wrong hands, the containment guidelines strictly forbid the use of the camera for anything other than simple documentation, and all uses of it must be thoroughly logged and checked. So, now that you know what the camera does, it's time to look at what kinds of strange and mysterious photos it's taken. After all, who doesn't want a chance to gain insight into the minds of the Foundation's most famous and dangerous inmates? First, to serve as a control, the team took a photo of a blue office chair. No change was recorded, proving that the camera didn't work on non-anomalous inanimate objects. Some of the earliest tests of the camera were the photos that the research team took of each other. One by one, the doctors and their assistants were photographed in neutral poses, smiling as if for a completely normal photo. Then they waited while the photos developed like normal Polaroids. Most of the research team had minimal changes in their photos. One was shown slouched in his chair drinking from a flask. One was shown in her civilian clothes, getting ready to go home from work. One doctor was in the exact same pose, but with a different colored tie on. The last assistant photographed, however, had their picture come out wildly different than how they were posed. Their desire revealed by the camera was so shocking that it had to be redacted, and the assistant was placed on temporary psychiatric leave. Following this first successful test, the doctor in charge of the project ordered a second round of tests to be conducted, this time on a series of D-Class personnel. A picture of one D-Class, who was photographed while eating in the cafeteria, showed up as scuba diving on vacation with his wife and child. He was allowed to keep the picture afterwards. Another had a similar result. He was photographed in a neutral pose like the members of the research team had been, and when the picture developed, the D-Class was seen holding a smiling baby, whom he identified as his 1-year-old daughter. After that, the results of the SCP-978 test started to get a little, well, weird. A notoriously twisted D-Class known as 7294 was photographed in his cell, and when the Polaroid developed, he was in the same cell playing a cello made out of a dismembered mannequin. D217-017 was a late-stage victim of SCP-217, a virus that turns organic matter into metal. You would assume that her innermost desire would be to be cured of her disease, but when she was photographed in her cell, the resulting Polaroid showed her completely made of metal, kneeling and praying at the base of a black obelisk. One D-Class, who had been rendered comatose and was on life support, was photographed in their hospital room. Their picture showed them as only a limp, deflated skin in their photo. The photograph of another D-Class, who had become increasingly listless and apathetic since their integration into the D-Class program, resulted in a picture that was exactly the same as they appeared in reality, except the light in their cell was slightly dimmer. Intrigued by these results, the research team wanted to see how the camera would react to SCP-148, a type of metal that blocks the psychic properties of other SCPs. A helmet was made from the material and placed on a D-Class who was given an adult magazine to read while his photo was taken. When the photo was developed, it was extremely blurry. Upon close analysis, the figure of the D-Class reading the magazine could still be made out, and around him the faint images of several nude people could be seen. The research team wanted to see if the results were the same when the camera was used on animals. Photos of the lab mice and rabbits showed them eating or mating in their respective Polaroids. A zebra finch was shown escaping its cage, while a guard dog and its handler were shown playing fetch in the park. When cockroaches were photographed, there was no difference visible between the picture and reality. But the most exciting test results came when the camera was tested on other SCPs. For a few of the SCPs tested, there was no visible difference between the picture and reality. This was the case for SCP-173 the Sculpture, SCP-343 nicknamed God, SCP-014, an immortal man who is, over time, being turned into concrete, and SCP-063, the world's best toothbrush. When SCP-035, better known as the Possessive Mask, was photographed in its glass case, the picture showed an unidentified individual wearing the mask, sitting on a throne and surrounded by 3 masked corpses. The team took a picture of SCP-043, a haunted copy of the White Album that was being interrogated while on a turntable. In the picture, the album was being returned to its sleeve. They then photographed SCP-049, the Plague Doctor, standing in his cell. In the picture, the Plague Doctor is hugging an unidentified small child and surrounded by instances of SCP-049-2. When they took a picture of SCP-050, a mischievous statue of a monkey reading a book, the result was predictably playful, given that SCP's history of pulling pranks. The photo that came out of the camera showed the camera itself, with another picture of itself coming out of the developing slot. Microscopic analysis revealed that this recursive photography kept going until the cameras in the pictures of the other cameras were too small to see. The team next photographed SCP-053, the young girl, and the photo was taken as the young girl was drawing with crayons in her cell. In the picture, she was riding through a sunny field on the back of her friend SCP-682. SCP-053 and SCP-682 were even wearing matching bows, dresses, and pink nail polish. When they took a picture of SCP-096, the Shy Guy though, the picture showed SCP-096's cell with nothing in it. SCP-085, the living 2D sketch known as Cassie, was photographed tinkering with a drawn car. In the developed photo, Cassie was engaged in the same activity, but both she and the car were now three-dimensional. The team took a photo of SCP-106, the old man, emerging from a wall within his cell. When the photo developed, it showed the old man roaming a wheat field near an old farmhouse. From the porch of the farmhouse, an older woman is greeting SCP-106 with open arms. They also took a photo of SCP-168, a sentient calculator sitting on a table in its containment cell. In the picture, a teenage boy is seen doing complex math homework using the calculator. Next to him on the table are thick textbooks with titles like Complicated Math, Difficult Math, and Math You Need Your Calculator For. The photo of SCP-261, a vending machine that dispenses snack products from alternate universes, showed the SCP in its usual hallway, almost completely buried in coins. SCP-507, an otherwise normal man who unwillingly teleports between dimensions, was photographed while eating in the cafeteria. The developed picture showed him dressed as a Foundation researcher talking to other researchers. When SCP-682 was photographed, floating in its containment tank, the resulting picture showed the SCP surrounded by the corpses of all of the Foundation staff and mauling the person who had taken the photo. A researcher's note accompanying this photo reads, "Well, that was predictable." Yes, it was. Just for the fun of it, the team also tested the camera's effects on a few other Foundation personnel. They took a photo of Dr. Bright while he was arguing with Dr. Clef. The picture that came out showed a tombstone engraved with the words, "Jack Bright, resting at last." The team also took a photo of Dr. Clef as he stormed out in a huff following the argument. Given that Clef's face cannot be photographed, they were curious as to what the results would be. The picture showed little difference compared to reality, save for the fact that Clef's head was replaced by an image of a hand making a rude gesture. Upon closer examination of the photo, the team also realized that there was a young girl in the background who, strangely, had cloven hooves instead of feet. A young SCP-166 perhaps. The team then took a photo of Dr. Fisher holding his pet hamster. Contrary to expectations, the picture revealed not Dr. Fisher's desires, but the hamster's, showing the hamster sleeping peacefully in its cage, with Dr. Fisher nowhere to be seen. As you can see from these test logs, the effects of the camera are, well, inconsistent, with some photos showing very immediate, simple whims, and others showing the subject's deepest and most secret desires. While the researchers working with SCP-978 seemed like they had a lot of fun getting to peek into the minds of all their coworkers and test subjects, there's no telling what kind of pandemonium could be unleashed if someone on the outside ever got a chance to use it. Thankfully, the camera, which has been classified as safe for obvious reasons, is kept securely in security locker HJ12 at Site-17, which means none of us have to worry about our own pictures taken by the Desire camera leaking out. But if someone did get the camera out and took your picture, what do you think they'd see? Down in the depths of Facility 23, a group of scientists stand before a massive rumbling piece of machinery. They all hold their breath as the gigantic mechanism suddenly stops. It's eerily quiet for a moment before a door slides open. The scientists crane their necks to see inside, to see what the result of their great experiment was. These were some of the greatest minds in the SCP Foundation, but nothing could prepare them for what they had created. September 9th, 2008 was an unseasonably frosty day when Dr. Charles Gears, one of the SCP Foundation's most iconic scientists, parked his Honda Civic outside of what seemed like an innocuous government cold storage warehouse. He sipped his coffee and surveyed the building, which he, along with about 100 others in total, knew to be Site 19, Facility 23. Why was Dr. Gears, former director of all Euclid-level containment at Site 19, here today? Because official testing was about to begin on SCP-914. The Foundation had acquired the machine now known as SCP-914 some time ago, but only after its recent reclassification to 914 had it been relocated to Facility 23. It must have been important because the entirety of the facility was being repurposed for SCP-914 research. They were dealing with an immensely complicated piece of anomalous technology here, and the same question was on everybody's lips. What exactly does this thing do? Dr. Arthur Hackett, the facility director, had requested the cold, clinical assistance of Dr. Gears in providing the answer. Once he'd finished his morning coffee, Dr. Gears headed inside. The facility's security chief, Agent Alan Sedna, had been beefing up security at the building, and at least 2 mobile task force units were already on call in case anything happened. The first day of official testing is always a crapshoot. You might get a nice drink out of it, like with SCP-294, or you may get an XK-class end-of-the-world scenario. You never really know. All Dr. Gears knew, as he walked up the granite steps to the main entrance, was that he was already feeling exhausted. When you've dealt with anomalous objects and entities for decades on end, the sense of wonder and mystery begins to wear off, only to be replaced with a kind of tedium any office worker knows all too well. Everyone knew that Dr. Gears was devoted to the job, perhaps more than anyone else, but he approached the job with an emotionless effect. You wouldn't know from looking at him if he was thinking about the deadly anomalous creature in the next room, or what he was going to have for lunch that day. The doctor passed through security and was briefed in the break room by Dr. Lucius Veritas, Director of Research at Site 19. He explained that the machine seemed to work in the absence of any power source. Its mechanical structure is similar to machinery from the Industrial Revolution, but it's exceedingly complex for something constructed in that time. Foundation analyses into the structure of the 914 machine have shown it to have as many as 8 million moving parts, and that might even be an incomplete estimate. Dr. Gears wore his trademark blank face as he listened, solemnly nodded, and asked to be shown the anomaly. He was led into Containment Chamber 109B by a pair of guards. According to all current Foundation tests, the machine doesn't appear to pose any active risk of containment breach or danger to the guards, earning it the rare safe designation. As a result, aside from guards stationed on site, containment procedures for 914 were minimal. Whether this designation would need to be changed after testing was something Dr. Gears would soon find out. SCP-914 was a truly impressive sight to behold, a giant clockwork mechanism taking up around 18 square feet, with an unfathomably complex combination of screw drives, belts, pulleys, springs, and gears. A less stoic researcher might see the humor in recruiting a Dr. Gears to test such a device, but comedy definitely wasn't one of Dr. Gears' specialties. He stared at the machine with a detached fascination, analyzing its vital components at a glance. Gears noted a large mainspring beneath a rudimentary selection panel. The panel is copper, with a large selection knob fixed to an arrow above a series of different options: rough, coarse, 1-to-1, fine, and very fine. There was also a large key below the selection panel, for the purposes of winding up the mainspring and initiating whatever procedure this machine was designed to enact. Next, Dr. Gears noticed 2 large booths connected to the machine by a pair of equally large copper tubes. The booth on the left labeled Intake, and the right labeled Output. Incredibly, Dr. Gears was able to immediately deduce the purpose of this machine. It was designed to enact some kind of transformative process on whatever was placed into the intake booth. But what kind of transformative process? That's exactly what Dr. Gears was here to find out. The experiment was simple. They would gather a series of samples, both inanimate objects and living tissue, and use them to explore the different permutations of the 914 machine's transformative abilities. This initial series of experiments were approved by O5 Command and the site director, and with the 47 researchers present in Facility 23 at his disposal, Dr. Gears commenced his research into SCP-914. To minimize risk, Dr. Gears decided the first test would be a simple kilogram of steel. On his orders, the steel was placed into the intake booth. With the doctor's approval, a junior researcher set the control panel setting to rough and began twisting the mainspring key, at which point the booth's doors closed and a small bell inside chimed. The machine began to rumble, its 8 million working pieces churning into life. It continued like this for around 10 minutes before falling silent, at which point the output booth opened. What had once been a single lump of steel weighing 1 kilogram was now an uneven pile of smaller lumps, with evidence of laser cutting. Dr. Gears made note of the fact that having lasers within such a machine is both anachronistic and anomalous, and that the rough setting appears to messily cleave the object placed within the intake booth into pieces. Dr. Gears also noted that it would be unwise to test any kind of explosive material on the rough setting, unless of course they wanted to destroy the building. The research continued. Dr. Gears used another 1 kilogram lump of steel to test the 1-to-1 feature. This time the result was far more peculiar. The output booth contained the exact same weight in steel screws. This result was sparking even greater connections in Dr. Gears' impressive analytical mind. Firstly, the 1-to-1 feature caused the 914 machine to transform the output into something different from, but similar to, the intake. And while this would require further testing, it appeared that the 914 machine, despite being anomalous, does still follow the laws of physics. Samples passed through the machine conserve their mass and would not be transmuted on an atomic level from one element to another. Next, Dr. Gears pushed another lump of steel through the machine on the fine setting. The result this time was a kilogram of steel carpet tacks. From this, Dr. Gears was able to ascertain that the fine feature improves the samples placed within the intake booth somewhat. However, things got even stranger when Gears performed the same experiment on the very fine setting. The output booth provided several unknown gases and a lump of unknown metal with anomalous qualities. Namely, it was resistant to heat up to 50,000 degrees, impossible to bend or break with any force, and was a perfect conductor of electricity. Dr. Gears suddenly realized his task here may be more interesting than he'd initially imagined. Was that a bit of a smile on his face that one researcher spotted? Surely not. This was the famous unflappable Dr. Gears, after all. The doctor decided to take it up a notch and began to test more complex items in the 914 machine. He removed his own wristwatch and placed it into the input booth before setting the machine to course and letting her rip. Literally, in this case. When the output booth was opened, the watch had been painstakingly disassembled into its component parts, with no damage to said parts. Dr. Gears noted the coarse feature as a more mild version of the rough, in the sense that it was able to take an object apart without any kind of fundamental damage. He also made note of the fact he'd need to get himself a new watch. Dr. Gears then asked one of the researchers to surrender their cell phone for testing. While none were excited at the prospect of their phone getting eviscerated by a clockwork behemoth, one of the researchers eventually surrendered their BlackBerry Curve to the doctor. He placed it into the intake booth on the 1-to-1 setting, and 10 minutes later, the output booth released a brand new Apple iPhone. Sadly for the researcher who donated his BlackBerry, he wasn't allowed to keep the new device. Naturally, Dr. Gears was interested in trying out the anomalous, very fine setting on a more complex object. Seeing as no other researchers were eager to hand over their personal effects, he took a Colt Python revolver from a member of security and ran that through the machine on very fine. The result was an extremely powerful energy weapon containing gamma radiation, which fired a beam capable of disintegrating anything in its path. While the weapon's power was immense, it was also too dangerous and unstable to be added to the Foundation's armory for general use. Having collected a wealth of data from more complex objects, Dr. Gears was eager to move to the next stage, live test subjects. While his fellow researchers had some reservations, the experiments pushed on, beginning with mice. A single white mouse was put into the intake booth on the 1-to-1 setting, and the machine was activated. The result 5 minutes later was an almost identical creature, save for the fact that it now had brown fur. Encouraged by the fact that the mouse survived the refinery process, Dr. Gears next applied for the use of 2 chimps in his SCP-914 experiments. The first chimp was run through the machine on the fine setting. The result was a chimp of human-level intelligence, who has since begun working for the Foundation under the alias Dr. Bobo, and the data from this test has been expunged from the official reports to protect Dr. Bobo's privacy. The second primate test, this time on Ruff, was not quite as positive. The chimp was dismembered, with the mutilated corpse showing evidence of cutting from high heat and crushing. Of course, everyone knew where these tests were eventually going. Dr. Gears requested 2 members of D-Class personnel for testing. The first was a 42-year-old Caucasian male weighing 108 kilograms and standing 185 centimeters tall. Dr. Gears ran him through SCP-914 on the 1-to-1 setting, resulting in a slightly taller Hispanic man with a slightly lower body weight. He immediately became severely confused and agitated, and attempted to attack the guards present, leading to his unfortunate termination by Foundation staff. It was on the final live test that tragedy truly struck. A 28-year-old Caucasian male was run through the machine on the highly anomalous, very fine setting. The result was an utterly nightmarish creature. So horrifying that the majority of the details on its physical appearance have been expunged from the report. The creature made a sudden escape, breaching the relatively minor containment procedures intended for the inert SCP-914. This highly dangerous creature killed 8 guards, as well as 2 senior researchers upon emerging from the output booth. A special response team was dispatched to take the creature down, but that proved harder than expected. SCP-914 had massively improved upon the human original, especially when it came to its killing ability. Eventually, it was captured, but the special response team suffered injuries and memory loss as a result of the creature's anomalous powers. The creature was also severely wounded, and its blood caused corrosive damage to the plumbing in Facility 23. The creature expired from its injuries several hours later, turning into a cloud of blue ash that blinded a nearby research team. Dr. Gears would later comment that the experiments were ultimately still a success, in spite of some minor hiccups. Testing on the device continues to this day in an effort to understand the full potential of the machine. Though, for obvious reasons, biological testing on the machine has since been forbidden, without direct authorization from O5 Command. After all, if an already dangerous SCP was ever subjected to the very fine transformation setting, we could be dealing with something beyond our greatest nightmares. The ocean is a terrifying place. We've all heard the statistics. More than 80% of the ocean remains unexplored. That's most of the water covering the globe, completely unmapped and unobserved by science. It's a scary thought to dwell on, realizing that there's more water than land on Earth, and the sheer expanse of that water is so large that we've been unable to fully explore all of it. Just think, there are places in the ocean that have never been seen by a human. Who knows what's down there? If there was ever a personification of fear of the unknown, the ocean could definitely be it. Ancient shipwrecks sunk to the ocean floor, unknown sea creatures hiding away from humanity, and the general isolation of the suffocating dark blue the ocean swallows its victims with. All of these images that come to mind when thinking about the vast and mysterious depths of the sea. And no one is more familiar with nautical mysteries than the SCP Foundation. Today we'll be taking a look at SCP-5007, the Bass Strait, a wave of oceanic anomalies fit to make any seasoned sailor shiver in fear. The Bass Strait is an area of ocean dividing Tasmania and the Australian mainland. It's also the location of an unusually high amount of disappearances, sailors disappearing from their ships, fishermen leaving in the night and never coming back, even civilians disappearing from the shores that connect to the strait. The Foundation was aware of these disappearances since 1858, but were only able to craft theories about what was causing them. Was it an anomalous group of interest, hostile aerial entities patrolling the skies above the strait, phenomenon associated with unidentified flying objects? What about subterranean anomalies, weather patterns, or time dilation? For nearly a century, the Foundation was unable to determine the cause of the high number of disappearances in the Bass Strait, and then the phenomenon suddenly revealed itself. In 1980, on a beach connected to the strait, Agent Taberner, an operative of the SCP Foundation, was vacationing with his wife Mary and his 3 young children. The Taberner family was simply enjoying their day,
when they saw what looked like balloons in the sky. They were approaching quickly, and naturally the family moved closer. What happened next was a whirlwind, and those balloons the family were so interested in lifted them up from the ground and carried them away. Agent Taberner tried to fight back, but there was nothing he could do, except report to the Foundation what had occurred, and the organization responded in full force. The Foundation's research discovered that reports of UFOs and lights in the sky had coincided with many disappearances in the Strait, and that this was a pattern. The search for the 4 lost Taberner family members had become a large-scale investigation into unexplained disappearances along the Bass Strait, and within 3 weeks, it was determined that these patterns were consistent across the entirety of the Strait's coastal regions. Some witnesses were interviewed, but the vast majority of these abduction cases had no witnesses whatsoever. Of the minimal reports filed, the Foundation was told that there were lights in the sky, and that appearance of unidentified flying objects described as having the appearances of balloons. One such witness interviewed was a man by the name of Alan Stewart, a witness who was present during the disappearance of former Australian Prime Minister Harold Holt, whose disappearance the Foundation believed may have had a connection to the Bass Strait anomalies. During the interview, Stewart claimed that Holt and his family, while voyaging on their yacht, decided to leave the boat and go for a swim. Holt turned to Stewart and asked him if he could see the balloons around the cliff. Stewart had no idea what Holt was talking about, but Holt was insistent on seeing them. He swam deeper out into the ocean, saying that they weren't normal balloons and that there was someone inside of them. Stewart and Holt's family called out for him to come to shore, but he wouldn't listen. Stewart tried to rationalize what he saw next. Maybe it was the current sweeping Holt away, but he couldn't lie to the Foundation interviewer. Stewart saw Holt go further and further out into the water, and suddenly the Prime Minister turned around. He began swimming in the opposite direction, and he was screaming. Suddenly, Holt was lifted from the sea and pulled into the air by something emerging from the clouds. The Foundation thanked Stewart for the interview and continued their investigation. 2 years later, in 1982, emergency services received a large number of calls pertaining to UFO sightings off the coast of Norman Bay, Victoria. The Foundation was quick to respond, alerting task forces and local sites to prepare for an investigation. Upon arriving to the scene, they confirmed the existence of multiple entities that would later be documented as SCP-5007. They evacuated civilians from the area and successfully managed to capture the creature, which was later transported to Site 40 for containment. It was a sight to behold. The entity, now designated SCP-5007-S1, was a cluster of human bodies fused between a grouping of black tentacles of varying length. Each tentacle was fused to the skin it touched directly. The stomachs of the corpses were grossly swollen and distorted to massive sizes to hold large quantities of gases inside, the buoyancy of which the entity used to achieve a passive flight. Across the entity's surface were clusters of eyes and bioluminescent glowing organs. Many of the humanoid components of the corpses appeared to have been removed and misplaced across various parts of the entity's body. What's more is that the Foundation discovered that human portions of SCP-5007 appeared somewhat cognizant and aware of their situation. Their vocalizations were incoherent and barely understandable, consisting of gasping and whimpering, but the corpses were observed to implore other individuals to approach them when encountered. SCP-5007's behavior during abduction scenarios was documented during the initial containment event, and due to the Foundation's painstaking research, a pattern was established between all SCP-5007 encounters. First, the victim would be alone, or otherwise vulnerable in a coastal location. SCP-5007 haven't shown a preference for weather, be they clear or hostile skies, but they have localized all of their activity to the Bass Strait, in small coastal towns, beaches, or boats. SCP-5007 will then move towards the shore, stalking the victim before lowering its tentacles and appendages to grab the individual, snatching them into the sky. An SCP-5007 instance can even abduct multiple people at once. One event observed had 8 men from the decks of a commercial fishing boat taken into the sky in under 15 seconds. Once captured, SCP-5007 instances will dart across the water at a high speed and take their victims to an unknown location. Discovering where SCP-5007 took their victims became a top priority for the Foundation.
After extensive witness interviews and compiling a database of likely victims, they determined that there must be at least 16 instances of SCP-5007 unaccounted for. Personnel kept a close watch on the coastlines and waters of the Bass Strait, and equipped various marine task forces with research vessels capable of tracking any instances if they encountered them. In 1985, the Foundation's research efforts paid off, and several survey teams operating in the area reported a sighting of an extremely large SCP-5007 instance heading towards a coastal town. A mobile task force was sent to track the entity. The team observed the entity from afar as it stalked a private fishing boat. Even from the distance, Foundation personnel recognized the likenesses of several missing persons as faces of the corpses of SCP-5007. The task force captain had to remind his team to keep it together, claiming that they were not people, but just parts of the specimen. But everyone secretly knew the truth. The fishing vessel was a private one, occupied by a small family. The entity slowly approached and quickly pulled a woman into the air. The family panicked and quickly tried to reach cover for safety, running into the ship's cabin. The entity ran its tentacles along the boat until it pulled the door open, snatching another 2 victims. The task force was unable to help them, as their mission was to track the instance to its origin point. It was a horror to watch. The task force implanted a tracking beacon onto the entity and quietly followed it out to sea over the next 4 hours. They then discovered a large gray reef with several shipwrecks dotted across it. 13 SCP-5007 instances floated over the area, some holding on to the land reef with their tentacles. The entity dropped the abductees from the fishing boat, who were coerced by the entities into diving into a massive pool of water located in the center of the reef. One by one, each abductee was pulled below the surface by something lurking in the pool, all while the SCP-5007 instances watched. Disgusted, the task force reported what they observed to the main site, and the reef would be designated as SCP-5007-A. The Foundation's analysis of the reef led to the discovery that the rock covering it seeped iron oxide from an unknown source, and the rocks achieved growth at an anomalously fast rate, often as little as 40 minutes. All of the wrecked ships and aircraft that washed across the shore of the reef were covered with a dark stone. The reef was teeming with anomalous marine life, including SCP-5007, a red algae that fed upon the freshly grown rock, marine worms capable of levitation, spiders that lived in silk retreats underneath the waterline, small fish, and giant organisms resembling large clumps of kelp, which the Foundation had previously documented as SCP-4159 in a separate investigation. SCP-5007 often rested their tentacles on the outcroppings of the reef while inactive, but what caught the Foundation's attention the most was the giant pit located in the reef's center. Unmanned exploration drones found that it had a depth of at least 4,000 meters, and water samples taken from the pit revealed large quantities of human DNA, prehistoric bacteria, and unknown compounds that possess significant life-preserving qualities. When a being was submerged in the compound, they were able to survive heavy injuries, even when fully surrounded by the liquid and unable to breathe. The Foundation's exploration of one of these shipwrecks led them to a journal. Most of it was illegible due to water damage, but one passage survived, located in the back of the book. It detailed the experience of an unknown crew member of the ship caught in a storm. It reads, "Moresby spied land ahead, and the boys said that there are giant balloons hanging over the island. We are all afeard, but there is naught we can do but beach ourselves and hope for rescue. Should I be killed in the crash, I want my mates to give this journal to my Mary. Might know I spent my last thinking only of her." The interior of the ship contained human remains inside, but there were less skeletons than the Foundation would expect for a ship of its size. The location of the rest of the bodies was unknown. Another event related to SCP-5007 the Foundation documented involved Frederick Valentik, a pilot engaged in a training flight over the Bass Strait in 1978. Valentik's disappearance was marked by his latest communication with air traffic control, when he mistook an SCP-5007 instance for an unidentified aircraft. "It seems like it's stationary. What I'm doing right now is orbiting, and the thing is just orbiting on top of me. Also, it's got a green light and it's sort of metallic, like it's all shiny on the outside." Shortly after this, Valentik's transmission was interrupted by what was described as metallic scraping sounds, believed to be the SCP-5007 instance attacking the aircraft and jamming its propellers with its mass.
After crashing into the reef, it was believed that Valentik and his aircraft were pulled beneath the surface of the pit, just as the abductees had been prior. The Foundation decided to construct a provisional secure research facility on the reef. They named it Site 40-R and documented all returns and departures of SCP-5007. They also set up a series of containment procedures that resulted in SCP-5007 returning with its victims 83% less often than before the site's construction. But this was short-lived. In 2008, the site logged over 36 instances returning to the reef, with only 2 not having any fresh abductees. The instances' origins were unknown, and it was as if they appeared out of thin air. No other monitoring post had documented their appearance, or even spotted them before they arrived at the reef. It was years later, in 2017, that the Foundation eventually was able to successfully explore what was deep inside the pit at the center of the reef. They already knew that there was a large entity lurking beneath, as evidenced by what happened to the victims of SCP-5007 that were later deposited inside the pool. All previous attempts to explore the pool were met with failure, as the water pressure of the pit's depths caused all craft to collapse due to hull damage. This time, however, they managed to construct a high-tech submarine, labeled the SCPs Nautilus, which was capable of diving a maximum of 13,500 meters underwater. They decided that a D-Class personnel would be trained to man the submersible and carry out the exploration. The mission was simple. The Nautilus was to dive to the bottom of the pit and to describe the depth readings. Cameras and microphones were equipped to the vessel. Due to the depth, remote viewing of the footage was impossible. Instead, the Foundation had to physically recollect the vessel in order to view the footage. Upon recovery, some of the footage suffered data corruption, but what was there shook those who viewed it to their core. The footage showed the D-Class's experience going deeper inside the pit. At first, it seemed ordinary. The trench had a number of rocky outcroppings dotted with black-yellow vines growing along the walls. Also present were various marine life forms, such as the spiders or the fish. Going deeper, the sub observed an SCP-5007 instance clinging to an outcropping. Several tendrils emerging from the pit's depths were wrapped around the instance and holding on to the entity, as if it were feeding from it. Another 16 SCP-5007 instances were seen resting along the walls, each clinging to the outcropping. As the sub went deeper, the D-Class remarked that there were dozens of plane and shipwrecks, but also well over 100 SCP-5007 entities. Most of them were held there by the black tendrils. The D-Class, as the sub went even deeper, began noticing human remains. No short amount of them either. Deep into the pit, there was a large mass of human remains covering the entirety of the pit. Bodies crushed and drained of blood, but still possessing intact eyes. Each individual was still alive, kept preserved by the life-sustaining compounds found within the water. The body stared at the sub and moved, attempting to grab onto the vehicle. The D-Class swore they were trying to say something, mouthing words to the camera of the sub. As the sub passed through the mass of bodies, it emerged into a completely dark, black clearing at the bottom of the pit. For a second, the D-Class thought he was safe, but then, a large black tentacle rapidly emerged from below and grabbed onto the Nautilus, dragging it even further into the depths. The D-Class screamed and panicked, but there was nothing he could do. The tentacle possessed a large cluster of eyes, mouths, and human heads seemingly grafted onto its mass. And then there was another tentacle, and then another. The Nautilus was pulled to the bottom of the pool. The D-Class's screams were still heard even as the picture cut out. Sometimes graphic body-altering images of the tentacle's features were visible on the screen, but most of the footage was indecipherable. After minutes of distorted, corrupted footage, the Nautilus was seen again, rapidly ascending to the surface. Somehow it had managed to escape the entity at the bottom of the pit. Upon recovery of the craft, it was found that the Nautilus was covered in a thick, organic coating similar to a black slime mold, but with dozens of eyes growing from it. The D-Class inside showed severe psychological damage and attempted to harm Foundation personnel. They were terminated shortly after due to being a danger to those around them. Following review of the footage, the Nautilus was to be dismantled and incinerated, along with the remains of the D-Class. A reinforced containment seal was fitted over the pit, with the intention of keeping whatever was down there isolated from the surface. But this was short-lived. After the containment seal was fitted, Site 40 underwent a massive communications blackout.
Every device on site received an email containing a single image of a large eye taken from a security camera. The text beneath it simply read, "Found you." Some personnel who viewed the email underwent anomalous changes, growing new physical features such as eyes and other various growths across their body. The entirety of Site 40-R went offline, and the Foundation could not establish contact. In an emergency effort to do so, Mobile Task Force Gamma-6 Deep Feeders was sent to investigate. The task force's assault on Site 40-R was a daring effort, as the majority of the site was completely overtaken by tentacles, growths, and anomalous alterations. While numerous altered personnel were lost due to the mission, it was ultimately a success. Some altered personnel were able to be saved through extensive surgery to remove their anomalous growths, and after everything was said and done, the site was repaired and reconstructed without incident. Following the site's repair, there has been little activity from the entity within the pit, but the Foundation continued to keep an eye on the creature and the ecosystem of the anomalous marine life that live on the Bass Strait, never knowing what their next move might be, and always keeping in mind the risk that comes with dealing with these poorly understood entities. Now go check out SCP-3000 Anatashisha and SCP-057-IT Under the Sea for more anomalous entities living, breathing, and thriving in the depths of the unknown.